We're just waiting on an... I can hear it through the computer. We're just waiting on another couple of people because we have people online, although those online do not count for quorum. Yes, there are... The rules we passed said that if Skype could be debating or voting, but they would not count as a quorum.
Double check.
Pardon? Apologies, committee members. We've just checked, and actually, those online do count as a quorum. I think there was debate whether that did count last time, so apologies. Right. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, ki mā taratara ki tai. E he ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihe mauri ora. Kia ora everyone, and welcome to the Environment and Climate Change Committee. Apologies for that brief confusion that I created. We will just briefly go to an acknowledgement from the Mayor Phil Goff on the passing of the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, as he watches over us from the picture at the back there. Thank you.
Kia ora, Mr Chair, kia ora koutou, and acknowledge my tuku link, and sorry to hold up your presentation. This is our first meeting of Auckland Council since the passing of Prince Philip on Friday night, and I think it's appropriate at this meeting to pay a tribute to him and in particular to pass on our sympathy and condolences to Queen Elizabeth. As the Queen stated, after 73 years of married life, the death of her husband has left a huge void in her life and has created a real sadness, notwithstanding his nearly 100 years longevity for her and for her family. Some years ago, the Queen paid a tribute to her husband, and I thought appropriate to read what she said. He has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years, and I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim or we shall ever know. There are things that I think are quite notable about the Duke of Edinburgh's life, and I want to touch on some of them. Firstly, they had reached their platinum wedding anniversary, and not many people can aspire to achieve that. And in this day and age, and including for the royal family, the longevity of that marriage is something to acknowledge and to remark upon. The Duke himself was at times controversial, but today I think is the opportunity to acknowledge his service. Some say that it was simply a life of privilege. In some respects it was a life of privilege, but if you look at his earlier times as a child, when for years at a time he was separated both from his mother, who suffered from mental illness, and from his father, it was a pretty difficult upbringing. And he prevailed over those difficult circumstances of his life. He had active service in the Navy during the war. He, from the time that the Queen became Queen in 1953, undertook something like 22,000 public engagements. Now, we all think we're pretty busy, but 22,000 public engagements over a lifetime is pretty remarkable. It might have been a privileged life, but it was also a life that was incredibly challenging, being in the public spotlight and pretty relentless in his demands. I think here in New Zealand we'll remember him for his particular support and encouragement for young people through the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. And we'll remember him, and this is something that he's passed on to his eldest son, as being a strong advocate for conservation. Appropriate to have our guests here today for that, long before conservation and a sustainable environment became something that most of society had embraced. But I think at this time we would want to pass on our sympathy and our condolences to the Queen. I think I'm looking at the age of those around the room. Certainly for me, she's been Queen of our country and head of the Commonwealth throughout my entire lifetime. And whether you're a Republican or you're a monarchist, few would deny that she has been tireless and relentless and honourable in the service that she has given to her country, to our country, to other countries of which she is head of state, and the Commonwealth. So I think it appropriate, Mr. Chair, that we formally acknowledge the Queen's loss, pass on our condolences to her and to the royal family, and take a minute of silence to remember Prince Philip's passing and to honour the things that he has achieved over his lifetime. And I'd invite us to stand and take a minute's silence. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, thank you, Mayor Goff, and thank you, Member Wilcox, as well. Thank you very much. We move now to our apologies. For lateness, we have Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore, Councillor Dalton, I think Councillor Philippina can no longer make it. Oh. Yeah. Councillor Watson and Councillor Walker for lateness. For absence, we have Councillor Greg Sayers, Councillor Mulholland and Councillor Bartley, and Councillor Philippina. And we have Member Wilson as well for absence. I think that Councillor Bartley is on council business, but we'll check. Okay. Cool. Could I have a mover for those? Councillor Simpson, seconder. Councillor Young. All those in favour? Aye. Move to accepting those for electronic attendance. We have Councillor Collins, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Casey, and potentially Councillor Filipaina. So all those in favour for accepting those, a mover? Councillor Simpson, seconder. Councillor Young. All those in favour for accepting those? Those opposed? Thank you. Are there any declarations? No. Could I have a mover for the minutes? Deputy Chair, Pipcoombe, seconder. Councillor Simpson. All those in favour? Those against? No. There are no petitions for public input today. We have no decline requests, no withdrawn requests. We do have an accepted request from the Matuku link. We have Anna Lily van der Broek, Dr. John Summich, John Steneland, and Chad Wilkie. And I'll get you we've got your presentation coming up. Thank you very much for being here today. It's fantastic. You've asked to come present to us, and we will head to you. You have 5 minutes, and then we'll have questions as well. So feel free to introduce yourselves and how you've come to be here as well as you go. So thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm John Steneland, and I'm one of the trustees of Matuku Link. We have Chad, our chair here. We have John Summich, and we have our secretary, project manager, Anna Lily. Jeff Davidson has a clash today and could not be here. Thank you, Mayor and councillors, for your time today. I just want to talk about what our aims are briefly. The aims are protect, restore and connect. Matuku Link is a connection between the Ark and the Park to the east and the predator-controlled areas of the habitat Te Henga, Forest and Birds Matuku Reserve to the north. I'll just point there. Here's Ark and the Park, a Forest and Bird and joint council project. Here's the Matuku Link in bright red that we're talking about. Matuku Reserve, the oldest project, and then Habitat Te Henga, predator-controlled area into which a rare duck, the Pārteki, has been released. And at the beach we have the Petrel Protection Project and Beach Care Group, so it's a big area. This wildlife corridor has had kokako, whitehead and robin traverse right through it, while Pārteki, the brown teal duck, have dispersed to the Te Henga Quarry to the east and way up to Goldie's Bush. And so a ridges to the sea connection is now achieved. Well, why are we here? We're here to thank the Auckland Council for their support through the Natural Environment Targeted Rate funding and the local board funds also, and to show how Matuku Link aligns with Auckland Council aims. There's a picture of the Mayor having just planted a couple of kahikatea trees. And Linda. Yes, yes. Sorry, Councillor. It's all right, yes. And we got a Mayoral Conservation Award, which was very great. So I'm going to hand over to one of our trustees, John Summich, to continue.
Yeah, good morning. I'll just speak how we sort of align with some of Auckland Council's aims. Climate change, wetlands are good for carbon sinks, and we've restored over 2 hectares of low-lying river flats with wetland species. This can then contribute to flood damage reduction and improved water quality. So it's better for humans as well as for nature. There's a recent flood. Another project of council, the 1 Million Trees project. Well, we haven't done quite 1 million, but we have planted over 10,000 trees, shrubs and sedges, many produced in our own nursery, run by our many volunteers. Indigenous biodiversity. We have extensive predator control at Matuku Link and the adjacent Forest and Bird Matuku Reserve projects, with endangered and threatened species such as the matuku, the Pārteki, pueto and matata. And Pārteki were once the rarest duck in the world, but we now have them breeding at Matuku Link. Their population countrywide is approaching 3,000 now, but compare that with something else we all know is rare, with North Island brown kiwi at 70,000, so it's still a very parlous state. We've had a fish ladder installed by Whitebait Connection in a large culvert, and that's allowed native freshwater fish to ascend a stream that was previously inaccessible. We are protecting and restoring and connecting with many community groups, and from the outset we've informed our many visitors from all ages and abilities on the benefits of wetlands and in our unique ecosystems here. So both on the property and in our restored barn that is going to be a centre for the community. Over 15,000 volunteer hours have been donated in the past 4 years. Okay, so yeah. How did we get here? Well, we purchased 37 hectares of bush and farmland in November 2016 for just over $2 million. Half of this was funded by the Native Forest Restoration Trust, Natural Heritage Fund, NGOs like the Waitakere Rangers Protection Society and our Forest and Bird Waitakere branch, and many private donors through a Give a Little campaign. But the remainder was through transferable development rights, creating a covenant on the native bush block with its high biodiversity values and transferring those foregone subdivision rights to a developer in a low biodiversity area. So how can Auckland Council help us further? Wetlands are important. Many properties in the Bethel's Waitakere River Valley have a portion of wetland, sometimes full of weeds or willows or with swampy grassland for stock or horses. The ideal situation would be that Auckland Council creates a revolving fund to buy these properties when they come up for sale, divide off and covenant the wetland part of the property, putting the house and dryland portion back on the market. Matuku Link would propose to revegetate and look after the covenanted part in partnership with Council. This could create a large public wetland and the carbon sink for people of Auckland. If this isn't financially possible, we propose that when such properties come up for sale, Matuku Link attempts to buy them and do the same thing, but creating a transferable development right in the process which should cover the loss of value when the house with its lesser land area is resold on the open market. So what we're asking Mayor and the councillors to do is to ask staff to investigate the possibility of a revolving fund to create a large wetland park, which could also have potential Ramsar status in the Tahenga Valley, or to encourage the planning staff to support Matuku Link when they might apply for a transferable development right to create an extended, protected, connected wetland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very succinct and some great ideas there that we'll definitely get a response on. The first question is Councillor Henderson.
Thanks. Not a question, if that's okay, Chair. Yeah, look, fantastic. Thank you for your presentation and thank you for all your work. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of formally acknowledge and thank you, but also to acknowledge at this time John Edgar, who is the chair of the Waitakere Rangers Protection Society, who passed away recently and did so much work in conservation for West Auckland for many decades, and that our city is in debt to John for his work as well as yours as well, and I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, and thanks, friends, for coming along and having me be part of some of your projects, especially the Pārteki release. In terms of our water quality targeted rate community project fund, that part of it, have you had access to that? Would that be one of the projects that could? Because this improves the water quality of the river, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We could definitely get Healthy Waters to get in touch with.
Yeah, so I think that's, yeah, okay, good. That's good to know. So that's an action point. Thank you.
Good, Mayor Goff.
Thank you. Just a very brief comment. First of all, to endorse Councillor Henderson's comments about John Edgar, who was a great West Aucklander and a great New Zealander. and his loss is very strongly felt by us. But for the Matuku Trust, it was a great morning that we spent with you there, and I was really hugely impressed with your commitment, your enthusiasm and your competency, and I'm sure through the chair we will try to examine ways in which we can continue to build that partnership with you and help where we can. But what you've done is, is just really astounding, and huge progress and huge commitment by all four of you at the table at the moment, and many others, that you've put so much into it, and that's an inspiration for the rest of us. So thank you very much.
Good. Member Wilcox.
Thank you. Yes, it's a really great project. Can you just kind of explain for me how your engagement goes with iwi and mana whenua and Kawerau in particular? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. That we have a member, we have a really good relationship with Te Kawerau Amaki. They've been involved from the first part that was before Matuku Link, which was the Pātiki release. George Tawa actually put one of the first birds in the water, and we're working continuously with Robin Tawa Gordon on the educational part of our part of Matuku Link, especially to make sure that we work together and have a collaborative approach to the storytelling we do. Also with the future marae that is going to be for Te Kawerau Amaki as mana whenua of the area in Bethels, that we collaboratively make sure that they can use our spaces and we can use theirs if that's appropriate. We also had Ngāi Tahu come out for a wānanga a while back with Ricky Bennett, using the reeds from our area to make traditional boats, and we did a tour of our property on how traditionally several parts of the whenua were used by the ancestors of the group of rangatahi that came along. So, thank you.
Thank you. No more questions or comments. Councillor Cooper, sorry, Linda. Councillor Cooper would like to move, and Councillor Henderson would like to second. Happy birthday again, Councillor Henderson, for the record. And just, before we move, just want to thank you again. Oh, sorry. Did someone? No? Oh, cool. Just want to acknowledge the fantastic work you have all done for very many years, and long before that some of these issues were popular, with the general public. So, there's been a long fight to get to do some of the things you've been doing, but also we acknowledge the thousands of volunteer hours that you've put into restoring our whenua and improving our water quality. And I think a lot of people assume that maybe it's just council that could do this, or, it would be impossible. So we really actually rely as communities on our volunteers and people putting in those hours. So thank you very, very much, and definitely keen to catch up with you on those questions you had in the next couple of months. That would be great. So all those in favour of the recommendation?
Aye.
Those opposed? No. And thank you very much, and have a great end to the week. Right, so we had no requests for local board input. We have no extraordinary items, and we now move to the CCO quarterly update. We've got Perrin and Noah, I think I've seen, from Auckland Unlimited, who are going to talk about their presentation. I will just acknowledge before they start, just quickly, I see Alec in the background there. Won't be official on the minutes, but I just want to acknowledge that this next week is Alec Tang's last week with us at Auckland Council as our Chief Sustainability Officer, and we've really, really, really appreciated all the work he's done for Tamaki Makaurau and Auckland Council, and we are very aware of the hours that have gone into creating and building and passing Te Tarakia Tāwhiri and everything that's gone into the 10-year budget, and all the other things you do over and above your council hours to spread the message for climate change and reducing our carbon emissions. We will miss you a lot, but we think Kāinga Ora is very lucky to have you on board, and I'm sure we'll be grabbing your expertise in whatever way we can in the future. So just before we went on to the main agenda, just want to acknowledge Alec Tang with a round of applause.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I don't know why we shouldn't actually acknowledge on the record our thanks to the incredible service that that Alec has given us over the period of time that we've actually delivered on the Climate Action Plan, and the work that he has led with his team to take us to where we got to. So if you want to move that, I'll second it. I'm sure we can fit it into the standing orders some way or other, and we can then pass it by acclamation again.
Okay, cool. Yes, we will have that recorded in the minutes, and I will move, and the Mayor will second. Councillor Simpson would like to say something.
Yeah, I would just like to acknowledge what you've said, Mr. Chair, and you, Your Worship. The bit that I'd just like to add, Alec, is the input that you have given during the LTP conversation on webinars, etc. That was been really, really helpful. And it's always been challenging. These things are always at night and in personal time, but I just want to acknowledge that from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. You don't want to say anything, Alec? No. Okay. Just in case, since it's. But yeah, once again, just thank you very much, and we acknowledge, the huge amount of work and the public-facing role you've actually had for climate change for Tāmaki, but also Te Tarakia Tāwhiri, and what you've put in. There'll be a long-lasting legacy there. So thank you very much. All those in favour? Aye. Those opposed? Councillor Simpson says you must stay. Cool. Thank you. Now we move back to Auckland Unlimited, and I'm sure you would agree that was worth delaying your time a bit. So, Perrin.
Morena koutou. I'm Perrin. I work for Auckland Unlimited, and I just wanted to reiterate what you just said as well. It's a big loss for us as well. I work with Alec at Chief Sustainability Office for about 4 years. We started around the same time. And I also worked on the Auckland Climate Plan, Te Tarakia Tāwhiri, and moved to Auckland Unlimited. But we really enjoyed his support and work with us as a CCO as well. So you will be missed, Alec. But I know how to find them. So it's no problem. I just wanted us to introduce ourselves first. Amanda.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Pearson, Climate Change and Sustainability Advisor in Perrin's team at Auckland Unlimited.
Good morning, Noah Maffett. I headed up strategy at Legacy AT, now Auckland Unlimited, and which includes the sustainability and climate innovation components, and really just here for moral support and to let you listen to the real experts here.
So thanks for your time this morning. I moved to Legacy AT about a year and a half ago, and took on the kind of building a climate change portfolio work program for AT, and also building a corporate sustainability kind of portfolio for AT. And at the time that I moved, we were working on the economy chapter priority of Te Tarakia Tāwhiri, and being an economic development agency, we are co-leading the economy chapter, and all the work we do, we will be aligning that with Auckland Plan 2050 and also Te Tarakia Tāwhiri. I was just kind of reflecting why we're doing the work. I don't think we need to make a business case about this anymore. We know that we are at a state of emergency, both at local government and central government. We are going to be delivering our plan, Auckland Climate Plan, Te Tarakia Tāwhiri, and we do have to do it as soon as we can, because we need to be doing our bit to achieve the 1.5 degree temperature increase, and that would be the limit for us to limit the damage to our planet and our country. The way we approach climate change and sustainability at Auckland Unlimited, it's twofold. We concentrate on internal work, which is our corporate sustainability and climate action internally, and also on the external bit, we focus on delivering Auckland Climate Plan and trying to make Auckland a more resilient city in terms of our economy. And all of the work we do, as I said, it will align with Te Tariki Atawhiri. So I've separated the internal and external work. There's a lot of material on each slide, so I'll just pull out a couple of items from each. As an internal perspective, we will be measuring our emissions, Auckland Unlimited, and it will be our first year we're doing it as one organisation. And also Amanda will be touching on that later on. We will be considering our risk in terms of climate change as well, as for our assets and also for our services. And being an organisation that we deliver events, we sponsor events, and we host events, waste is quite a key element for us in terms of sustainability. So having ambitious targets is quite key for us. In terms of our external work, a lot of our work focuses on the economy chapter, as I mentioned before, of Te Tariki Atawhiri. We want to support businesses in the transition to low carbon resilient economy. For example, helping them with training packages, how they could move to a resilient economy. And we will touch on some of the projects we've been doing in this area as well and down the track. And also working on different sectors as an EDA, for example, a visitor economy or tourism sector. We're supporting our destination team colleagues in developing a climate focused plan of how they could be a more resilient and low emission sector, knowing that we are such a far away destination in terms of our country. What does that mean for us? And having people coming all the way to visit our country, how do we manage to make the environmental impacts on our country? How do we minimize it and manage it? Just like to move into some example in internal work, corporate sustainability work we've been doing. So I'll just hand it over to Amanda to go over those.
Thanks, Perrin. So we were on track this year to achieve the Toitu Carbon Zero certification for Auckland Lantern Festival. It was going to be the largest festival to have achieved that particular certification, so we were really excited about that. But as you'll know, unfortunately, that couldn't go ahead due to COVID-19 lockdowns. But we have been able to transfer learnings, and we're going to do the same for Diwali later on this year. As Perry mentioned, we also are looking at doing a new baseline for Auckland Unlimited. On the screen you can see a few numbers there from both ATEED's first emissions inventory from last year and last year's Legacy RFA footprint. They've been doing it under the Carbon Reduce program for a couple of years. So we'll be, we've started collecting data for that. The audit will be in July, and then following that we'll work on a emissions reductions and initiatives plan across the organisation. And just briefly again, there's a lot on that slide, so I'll just talk to a couple of points there. We, in the context of post-COVID-19 2020 economic recovery, we developed a tool to assist business units across Legacy AT to consider climate change and sustainability impacts in their projects. But we're looking to develop that a little bit further and align with the Council sustainability procurement activities going on.
So now coming to some of the external work we've been doing with our key stakeholders and industry. One of the pieces of work that we led last year and is still ongoing this year is doing a climate change risk assessment on Auckland's economy. We started the work pre-COVID-19 last year, and it went to a stop. As we know, we went to first lockdown, and we continued doing the work. We decided this was really important in terms of economic recovery. And we did a disk-based analysis of our risk, climate change risk on Auckland's economy, and what does that mean in terms of as we recover and reinvest in our economy. Second phase of the work is ongoing right now and is around industry engagement, and we're also looking at Maori businesses and how climate risk specifically affects them, and that's being done through desk-based analysis and also a series of interviews with EB commercial managers and some of the Maori businesses. So there's quite a lot of information on this slide. Where I like to start from is saying why we thought it was really important to do this work was, as you see, Dr. Rod Carr mentioned that an economic stimulus package can either speed up or shall stall our progress on climate change. So we do need to make the right decisions as we invest in our economy to be climate resilient and move to a low carbon economy. So what we did was working with consultants named AECOM. AECOM did the work for the national government, central government, and as you might be aware, they did national risk assessment for the whole country last year. We aligned our methodology with the national risk assessment. So what we did additional to what government did was government focused on climate change physical impacts, which is around like extreme weather. And we added the transitional drivers, transitional risk as well. We know that we're going to have to move to a low carbon economy, and those transitional drivers could be, for example, putting a cost on our emissions. What does that mean to the industries and organizations and businesses in Auckland? So we looked at both of them as physical and transitional drivers. We looked at the risks and then prioritized the risk and came up with a series of recommended actions that as we recover from COVID-19, what are the key actions we need to take to do this in a more climate-friendly way? The focus of the work was on 4 sectors: food and beverage, from growth of food right to the plate, construction sector, screen sector, and visitor economy, which is our tourism sector. The work, it's got the output of the work, it's got 2 reports on it. The first report is quite a kind of a heavy technical report that for those who actually need the details, and it contains the methodology and all the risk, all the details that we did throughout that project. The inside report that I've got a picture of it is online accessible it's quite accessible, it's quite readable, and it provides kind of key highlights of the work that was done, and finishes with a series of recommendations in terms of recovery. There were no surprises in there, except that it reiterating what we all know already, and also helping us prioritize where we need to focus on. Maybe 1 or 2 elements of surprises for me personally was on emphasis on screen sector. Screen sector is a growing sector for us, and perception was that this sector doesn't have high impact, but the research studies have shown that it has got impact and we need to be managing it in a better way. So we do need to support the sector to be more climate resilient and having lesser impact in terms of emissions. So currently we're working with industries and having engagement from different sectors, as I mentioned, the 4 sectors. We've had workshops and great representation and a lot of interest from people that we are doing the work and their interest to continue working with us in helping them in transition to a low carbon resilient economy. We heard from them, from the businesses themselves, as what they see the risks are, what the priorities are, and also what are the work they're doing currently, what they've got in the pipeline, and what they think the gaps are. And at the moment, we are consolidating the output of the work, and also the Maori business work that we're doing, the reports, there's a draft report in place. The interviews are happening right now in the next few weeks. Once we consolidate that work, then we can actually publish that work as well. Another piece of kind of the economy chapter that we've been supporting is climate innovation. So why are we focusing on climate innovation through our work? Is we know, talking through other cities, without innovation, we're not going to be able to achieve our ambitious targets, climate targets. And we probably don't have the massive resources that some of the countries got in terms of putting into R&D, but we do work very well through collaboration. And I've looked at quite a few examples overseas that have been successful, such as Climate Kick. Climate Kick in Europe, which we've been talking to the CEO of Climate Kick, he's come back recently and just lives in New Zealand, and said it's all around bringing local government and businesses and industries, academia together to solve the climate challenges. It doesn't mean you have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of play. You could connect the right dots together and solve some of the climate challenges. We've had conversations with Callaghan, with University of Auckland, and a few of the large businesses that are quite interested for us to convene the conversations and continue the work as a safe space to bring people together and have those conversations. So in summary, how do we see our opportunity? How could we help Auckland? First of all, internally, we need to lead by example. As Amanda mentioned, we do need to do the right thing at our events. and have low impact, low carbon or zero carbon events. And also, in terms of being an ADA, Economic Development Agency, we are well placed to work with businesses to support them in the transition to low carbon economy, as you saw some of the examples of the work we've been doing. And we do work with foreign businesses to bring investment into Tamaki Makaurau. And our investment team is focusing heavily on green investment for Auckland, and we're supporting them in that as well. There's a lot to be done in the work we're doing, but as Noah mentioned, or I mentioned before, we're still going through the transition right now in terms of our merger, and hopefully we can consolidate some of the plan going forward, of climate plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a ton of work, and thank you so much for coming in and sharing it with us. We have, first question is from Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, g'day. This is wonderful work. I wanted to question the slide around thought leadership on climate change and sustainability, and I really appreciate the subsequent slides that went into a bit more detail on that. But how are we leading thought into the general public? It seems like we're doing a very good job of talking to people that are already kind of predisposed to doing some of the changes we need. But for people out there, they may not necessarily understand. So how are we doing that?
So the work we did on the climate change risk assessment, we've been quite conscious of sharing it on public platforms and advocating for it through our communications team. So we've had it at the news outlets and kind of conversation RCE had with, I think it was News Talk ZB. So we kind of try to spread the word that way. And also through our engagement, our business team engagement, that's kind of making people aware that we've got the facilities and also the knowledge to help the businesses as well. But our resources are a bit limited, so we need to be a bit clever in the way we provide that support. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Watson. Oh, sorry, Councillor Henderson, were you finished?
No, we can't.
Okay, cool. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very good presentation, and quite encouraging, the work that you're doing there. The comment that particularly resonated with me was the one to do with not reinventing the wheel and looking to examples overseas. So I think of some of the Scottish cities and towns like Aberdeen, for instance, who are kind of light years ahead of us. To what extent are their responses transferable? I mean, we always look at ourselves as being different. I think we're the same in a lot of ways. Are you finding that there's initiatives and practical initiatives that could be starting now that we could be picking up like really quickly, rather than the kind of sort of usual tortuous process we go through to come at what other people were maybe doing a few years back already?
Yeah, as Perrin mentioned, we're pretty deeply engaged in a lot of those conversations internationally. There are definitely applicable lessons here in New Zealand. Obviously, the difference is scale. Some of the Climate Kick received funding in the hundreds of millions, right, initially. So, we are operating in a different context here. But that said, I think there is a unique mix of how we as local government can intersect with the private sector and academia that is very much of and for this place. We hope through the LTP funding process and the climate action plan, there's a couple of initiatives within that we're hoping to get some funding to advance this and move it quite rapidly. So in terms of what's next on the horizon, we do want to get there pretty quick.
My comment, Mr. Chair, would be that, from a overall council perspective, what I see the possibility here is that if we have groups like within Auckland Unlimited that actually can make some real tangible progress, that can be a blueprint for the other parts of council. So I certainly would like to encourage this team for what they're doing, because I think that holds promise for the organisation as a whole.
Most definitely, and I know that the team are doing their best to work across the council. Are you seeing that grow sort of from the 10-year budget on, especially?
Yes, and definitely. I think the way we're looking at it is making the right partnerships internally first with the CCOs and working with key industries, businesses that they're already working in the space to bring solutions across the board. As you said, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. And if we do have to later on, we will, but bring the right solutions to the city and work with organizations to disseminate that. But definitely we have to work with CCOs to do that.
If I could also just quickly add, there's also, this isn't just a compliance exercise. There's real business opportunity in this space, and through our role as an EDA and working with the larger business community, that's an important lens to keep over this. Is Climate Kick, again, as an example, turned a lot of those ideas into real interesting business models. So we'd like to see how that can be applied here as well.
Thank you, and great question, Councillor Watson. Member Wilcox.
Thank you. Can you tell me what a green job is?
We did have a go at defining that, and it's a bit complex, but I did look at international definitions and what we see it as green job. And it's any job that it works in the climate space, that it could be adaptation, mitigation, making the city more resilient, or could be in waste management. So the category could be quite a vast one. But any job that it works towards sustainability, or we do have the definition internally for I did it for our economists, so we can actually kind of measure our green jobs. It's a bit complex.
So can you tell me what green investment is?
Green investment is what is going to help our city to achieve its climate goals.
So what proportion of green investment are we seeking in total, in comparison to the total amount of in foreign investment that we're attracting? And what mechanisms are we using or trying to use to influence that from a central government point of view? Because, I mean, the Overseas Investment Office, they do their thing.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to understand this. How are we trying to get this green investment, which I'm still unclear as to what exactly it is? I mean, green investment could be me investing in a rubbish dump, if this is the way we're talking. So I'm just trying to understand this part. Thank you.
Did you want to answer that, or do you want to have a go?
Yeah, I think it's an evolving space, and it's difficult to land on a precise definition. The investment attraction teams, as an overall sort of lens, think about the portfolio of investments with environment as a critical component in that. It does, to your point though, is taken that it does get difficult to make that super precise, and we don't have specific targets as a percentage of portfolio. But that is a space that we're continuing to advance thinking and refine.
You were talking about you doing a draft Māori survey. Would it be possible for the Independent Māori Statutory Board to receive a copy of that prior to it going out?
Of course, we have the draft report. I didn't want to share it here because it goes public, but I can send that to you to have a look at the draft report.
Yeah, just with Lisa down at the.
Of course, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Great questions, Member Wilcox. And also, our green investment for a council would be things such like our green bonds, which is hundreds of millions of dollars into things like electric trains and things like that, climate finance. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. First, I just want to acknowledge Lee Wei as part of your team. He came through our youth council many years ago, so identified earlier as a bit of a talent. So my question is around when you talk about our tertiary education offering going more online, how do we mesh that with the kind of desire to get more people back in the city centre? Because, I mean, that's also part of Auckland Unlimited's role to get more things happening. So how do you balance that out?
I don't, the recommendation there wasn't to stop bringing people here, but I think offering that as COVID happened, we realized that we need to have other offerings on plate as well. And that's why that was part of the recommendation. We're still quite active in the area.
What do the university think of that, or the tertiary institutions? Have you talked to them yet?
Yes, we've had an engagement with them through the risk assessment we did. So it is acceptable that we do need to have that offering, and some do have the offering online. It's not, I mean, people do it now, but we're quite active in the space of bringing students here.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper, and yeah, thank you for acknowledging Lee Wei, who was, before he was on the Youth Council, he was also on the Kaipātiki Youth Council, and when I was on the local board, and he helped us set up our youth centre.
We all want the reflected glory.
He's my Facebook friend. No, just kidding. Sorry. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, really good work, certainly around climate kick. I've heard quite a few presentations around that at a number of locations overseas. Given that there are quite a lot of alliances and reference points, partnerships with other cities that we could be taking advantage of. I don't know whether you've familiarised yourself with programs, for example, that Italy has, that we were a member of, and our membership is in limbo right now. But certainly the Transformative Action Program, TAP, the Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance. There are quite a number of things that we could be availing ourselves of. Another suggestion that I've put to the council on a number of occasions is that we team up as part of water-sensitive cities, for example. That could help really accelerate our water strategy and benchmark us far more with other cities. So I continue to make these suggestions, Mr. Chair, but certainly my observation is that our international engagement, with the exception of C40, has actually dropped over time.
So is that a question to the...
Yes, so I'm just raising those issues with you, particularly as it goes to alliances and communications with cities that are of a similar scale to us. Many of the C40 cities don't meet that category, for example, Aberdeen and others that Councillor Watson was mentioning. So just invite some response on what opportunities we have across that spectrum.
Just to clarify, opportunities in terms of partnership or on just using the expertise that been used overseas?
Expertise overseas, particularly in instances where other cities often have already been there and done that. For example, until a couple of years ago, we were a part of a sustainable procurement program through Italy. We've dropped that now. I don't know what we're doing within the sustainable procurement space, for example. There are great cities, for example, Malmo would probably be the leading city around sustainable procurement. So what liaison do we have with Malmo in terms of what they're doing in the space? And I gave the example of water-sensitive cities. Are we advancing that proposition, which could save us a lot of money and accelerate where we're at?
I think that the first steps we've taken is just to have local conversations at how we could lead this space. We have talked to Institute of Sustainability XCE, the Climate Kick Europe, and also Climate Kick Australia as well. We will have those ongoing conversations if this hub gets established. As currently we're just doing what we can in the kind of limited resources to figure out the partnerships, local partnerships is what we can achieve. But we will definitely look into your suggestion as well.
Thank you. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks, team. This is really good to see. This is very encouraging, and I'm just delighted to see this come from your organisation in its early childhood, youth maybe. But time is now. Look, there's a lot in here, and you'll be engaging with the private sector a lot. This is your responsibility to have a deep engagement and to be urging them to act more profoundly and really as well. And probably the realness that the private sector needs to be bringing to this is important. I'm aware of a lot of businesses doing the honest thing, and they're changing their structures, and they are facing the future, and they are real to the core about their climate goals. They're reinventing their businesses entirely. I'm also aware of a lot of greenwashing. One that came to my attention recently is a motor company called Mazda, and they are appearing to be environmentalists and supportive of environmental change and climate action in sponsoring a tree planting program, but at the same time they're doing it all out of the back of a BT50 Mazda 3-litre diesel. No one's really calling them out. I guess what I'm saying to you is when entities come to you, when they come to your office, are you likely to look at how real they are, not just the initiative that they're presenting? And if they're going to arrive in a Lamborghini and park outside on the yellow lines and then show you a green initiative, are you going to audit those companies to ensure that they are real to the core?
I wish we could solve that one easily. And I think we need to, as a CCO, need to be careful of our reach not exceeding our grasp on some of this. That said, Perrin and the team brought together 75 Auckland companies talking about their adaptation just last week before last. Some of those were not the usual suspects of people who would normally be in the room. So I think we are able to assist where we can to help some of these companies through a process. And then as we think longer term and we think about some of the new initiatives we'd like to put into play, those will require partnership at pretty deep levels, and the vetting of those partners and who we choose to work with from the private sector, we absolutely need to make sure that we're operating with people who have both good intent and the real result.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. And just one last question from me, probably bouncing off that, is I was invited to the X Labs, I think it was a month or 2 weeks before lockdown last year. And it was really amazing to see. I think it was like 36 companies from everything from Fletcher's to smaller companies all working together. Are you seeing those types of opportunities to grow rather than like a council-based thing to spread that across Tamaki Makaurau? Like, are you going to continue that work, or is it was more of a pilot at the start?
Well, XLab is more of a pilot, but we are looking at how we could, because it was quite resource intensive. So we're looking at how we could extend that to potentially climate innovation hub to make it in a smarter way so it's available to more businesses, because it was quite limited space for it. But we do need to make it available kind of citywide versus just a few select businesses. We are aware of that.
Perfect. Well, thank you again. I'll get Deputy Chair, you'd like to move, and I'll second. And just want to, thanks again to the whole team. I know it's been really tough with the merger and with, not being able to employ more staff and things. So all three of you are doing a fantastic job, and Leeway too. But the rest of the team, I know, are really serious about climate action. So thank you very much. So all those in favour? Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you. Toby and Greer, you're going to come up on item 9. Oops. My computer's frozen, but we've got the water strategy, water consumption targets, agenda item. Cool. We'll just let you go through the presentation. We assume everyone's read the substantive report.
Great. Kia ora tātou. Thank you for that introduction. Chair Hills, I just want to acknowledge Deputy Chair Coombe and Councillor Linda Cooper as the liaison councillor to Watercare, and the work that we've been doing with Watercare that we're here to present today as part of the water strategy. And obviously acknowledge Councillors Mayor and the members from IMSB. I'm going to go off script for 30 seconds and also acknowledge my colleague and friend Alec Tang for all of his work in the climate space. Really sad to see him go, really pleased to see where he's going. And I'm reminded that Alec is always on it, Greer and I, around climate mitigation actions, and those are well discussed through the LTP and so on, and then the adaptation to climate change and where the effects of climate change will be first felt in water. So I think it's a nice transition to our topic today. Right, we are here today. I'm going to go through, so I've got a presentation, a short presentation. It's in 2 parts, a bit of context and then some content. So I'll just take us through the context. So what are we here to do today? In the water strategy, councillors are setting strategic direction for the group. So we bring that strategic direction to this forum for decision making, and then that direction will direct investment and action across the group. Today we're looking at one part of the water strategy, and that's necessarily because as we work through the water strategy, we can finalise parts of strategic direction over time. So we're bringing you strategic direction on long-term water consumption targets. Those targets are in the paper, and we'll go over them shortly. They're necessarily precise, so they are a number, a precise number, and that's in order to drive that investment in action rather than a ranged approach. We lead with a precise number. We want to acknowledge, though, we're talking about a 30-year strategy here. So our 2050 number, that we do end up with a precise number in the report there, but we also want to acknowledge that we've got 30 years of learning and improving, building our information baseline, building on the data that we can gather, building on the insights that we can use in order to understand those targets and potentially refine those targets over time. And we just want to acknowledge that we are trying here today to, and the recommendation that we're giving today is around the beginning of that. So laying a foundation to better understand water use in Auckland, enable Aucklanders to be empowered to monitor and make more efficient their use of water on the network. And we think that we've done that with the recommendations before you today. And just a note there that, you know, the strategic direction that we're signalling today is a real opportunity here. We know from the feedback from the water strategy discussion document that Aucklanders are ready for a changing relationship with water, and this is one part of that changing relationship. And we just want to also acknowledge that, you know, given that we're thinking over a 30-year plus time frame, Auckland is undergoing incredible growth, and there's an opportunity here to harness that growth and change. Undergrowing started a trend. So there's a real opportunity there to think about how these new Aucklanders, new behaviours, new infrastructures, the way that we think through that population growth, how we meet that population growth, and how we think about how those Aucklanders are using water over time, means that we can have a more sustainable future and accommodate that population growth. So I just want to lay that context. There's another piece of context here. Obviously, you know, we're experiencing a drought, and we've gone through a period where Watercare and Council have acted in the immediate term to get us through that drought. Today we're talking about almost like, if that's the short term, we're talking here about long-term changes to the way that we can reduce consumption. So one way to think about that might be during the drought, short-term reduction in use, restrictions were used for a portion, we're still on the tail end of that. We're here today talking about building a framework for a reduction in per capita consumption, so per person use of water from the network over the long term, so that we don't have that sharp reaction during a drought. We actually enable Aucklanders to monitor their use over time. The last piece of context, it's really important here today, and I really want to make sure that we stress, Watercare have an application in to the Board of Inquiry for a Waikato River take. There's a key point here. The demand management, the water consumption discussion that we're having today, that is one part of thinking about the future. That's one part of prudent planning. The other part of prudent planning is the seeking of this application. And we see those two things as compatible, and the long-term water consumption targets that we're talking about today in no way negate the need to secure that consent, and we're supportive of that application for that consent. So there should be no doubt here today that we can somehow only pursue one option. Both are needed as we think about the future, and that's made really clear in the report as well. So just want to acknowledge that. There's also a resolution to that effect to make sure that we're making that point very clearly, that those two things, the water consumption and demand management and the seeking of this application, the thinking through of long-term supply, they are compatible with one another. Great. With that context established, I'll just move us through. So just on your slides, councillors, just a reminder that we've had some workshops on this content prior, and we are bringing you the recommended targets and pathway as a result of those workshops. I just want to acknowledge as well, and forgive me for not doing this initially, I've got Greer Lees here next to me as the technical lead of the supply and demand work stream, and she's obviously been present and a key part of our workshops as we've brought this work to you. And also to acknowledge our water care colleagues, some of whom are behind me today, who've also contributed a lot of hours to get us to today, and we're really excited about bringing that strategic direction to you. So just one final piece of context here, I think, from us, just to hammer home that we are in the water strategy discussion, and here today we are talking through the objectives, the measures and targets, that core red circle that you can see there on the diagram. This is the framework that we have from the water strategy document, and councillors will be familiar with this from the workshop. Today we are stepping through from the Auckland plan, the vision of Te Mauri o Te Wai, right through those issues and values and principles into setting one piece of direction for the water strategy. So, and I've just highlighted there, we're in the supply and demand space. So that's what that is there. So, on to the content of today. So our focus is potable water, and there's a few ways that we can go about reducing potable water. So potable water there being our reticulated drinking water that Aucklanders are consuming. So 3 big buckets in order to reduce our consumption of water. Efficiencies and behaviour change, network management, so that's through improved leakage primarily, and through the substituting of that potable water, so that drinking grade water that's piped to the home, the substitution of that potable water for non-potable water, such as rain tanks and so on. So just think of substituting your hose that might be on the main supply for some collected on-site water. So those are the 3 kind of core areas of reducing demand. So what we did is we looked at those 3 areas as a joint working group between Auckland Council and Watercare. And this slide is just giving councillors, giving them a summary there of all of the initiatives that we looked at in order to think about what per person use over time in Auckland over a 30-year period, what that would begin to look like. So we looked at network leakage, we looked at on-site capture for irrigation, we modelled smart meters, we modelled washing machines, toilets, shower heads, dishwashers. We thought about all demand management initiatives that could provide a saving per person over time. In the right-hand box there, for clarity, we've just made sure that we record some of the things that we did when we thought about those initiatives. So we made sure to account for a natural improvement in water reduction over time. We were really conservative about what we assumed each initiative could save an Aucklander, and we do that to make sure that our long-term thinking is robust. It also builds in a bit of fat, you could say, in a 2050 target, because it provides for changing technologies over time, but it means that we're not making any Herculean assumptions about what the technology of 2030, 2040 and 2050 might deliver. We instead stick to a conservative estimate to give ourselves that little bit of wiggle room. We want to make really clear as well that we do not use pricing of water in order to drive down demand. So it's not as if in our model we have assumed that that bills are going up and that Aucklanders would respond to a price signal to reduce demand. We've stayed away from annual bans in the same way. So we've modelled leakage, behaviour, and we've thought through how we can model those initiatives over time. So if I move us to our next slide. So this is just a concept diagram, and again, councillors will be familiar with this from our workshops. This is actually the diagram that's sitting in Watercare's application to the Board of Inquiry. So this is a concept diagram just to explain that yellow wedge of opportunity. That's the term that we've been using. So from left to right, 2020 to 2050, this graph is showing total demand over time. And of course, as population grows, and this graph assumes population growth for 30 years, that demand for water naturally increases. There's more people demanding more water, using more water from the network. The yellow space in this graph is where our working group modelled pathway options. So different mixes of initiatives, different uptake of initiatives, more rain tanks here, more efficient appliances there, less leakage from the network there. And we modelled options all through that yellow wedge in order to derive our recommended option. We went through an options analysis, and there's more detail in your report, in order to arrive at the targets that you've got recommended today. This next slide just reminds us of the key principles that were guiding us as we arrived at the recommended option. And so there's that message around cautious conservatism again, making sure that we build in a little bit of flexibility over time. We're really tried to be customer-centric, so used approaches that weren't invasive and didn't require big changes to the way that Aucklanders use water. We are more trying to play at that systems level, so looking at leakage and so on. We also asked ourselves, you know, can we invest to save? Often making small investments can be a way of saving money on the production of water. And then finally there we have the key principle guiding us around our resiliency over time. And as we think about reducing our potable water demand, we can make Auckland more resilient to periods of lower rainfall and perhaps disruption, should we make those investments in non-potable demand and kind of diversify the way that we're meeting our water needs. So those are the principles that were guiding us. So here we have a slide summarising the recommended pathway and the targets. So you'll be familiar with this as a result of our workshopping. So on the left-hand side, we've got current, this is the 2020 figures, and you can see that gross consumption is sitting around that 286 mark. Over on the, and we also break that down by leakage, residential and non-residential consumption. Over on the right-hand side, we've got the recommended targets, and these are reflected in the paper here today. So that's a saving of around 15 to 20% per Aucklander over time, over 30 years. And this graph is just illustrating some of the changes that we would be seeing in the Auckland of 2050. Less use per capita, with accommodated population growth through that reduced use per capita. We've got more customer information and so on. So this next slide here is the key components of the recommended pathway. And so these are kind of the big ticket items. So we have a smart metering program, and in particular we see that in all homes by around 2034. So there's a program and timeline in the report. That's about empowering Aucklanders to understand their water consumption, and it also can become a really effective communications tool for Aucklanders and for Auckland Council and for Watercare to communicate with Aucklanders about their consumption. It also provides us with a way of understanding the network and a layer of detail that can help us identify leaks. We have a smart and efficient network, and so this is the second point there about leaks as well, pushing for monitoring and reduction of leaks over time. Increased water efficiency education. We're requiring new homes to be water efficient. And that last point there, looking at making new homes that are currently required to have stormwater detention tanks and requiring those to be plumbed in for internal and external non-potable use from 2025. So that's a policy change that Council will work on following these recommendations and have implemented by 2025. So these are the key things that go into our thinking and that make the targets achievable. So we were also asked by this committee to think about an international context and to think about benchmarking our targets over time. So what this, I think if I click it, there we go, highlight it. So what this is showing on the y-axis is the gross per capita consumption, and on the x-axis we're looking at residential consumption. And what we've done is we've plotted some of the targets and signal targets of international comparators for a bit of a sense check on what our targets look like in that international community. We need to point out that most of the targets and signal targets that we have up here, they're in the next decade or so, and we've plotted Auckland's 2020 performance and the recommended target amongst that list. So it could be that the Singapore's and so on may have even lower targets by the 2050 for a comparator, is what I'm saying there. So I think the key point to look at here is we are in good company in terms of where we've established our targets. We're looking like we're in a band of good global practice. And just a reminder that the target that you're seeing here is the average. So we might have parts of Auckland that are in that bottom left area of the graph, global best practice. We might have parts of Auckland that are further to the top right. The target in here that we've established puts us in that band of global good practice. I think this is second to last slide here. So this is just a reminder, and perhaps one that we will come back to during the discussion, just to kind of put everything here on a page. We've got the concept diagram there dealing with the growth and demand over time. We've included those recommended targets. They're the ones that are sitting there in the paper, and just showing that difference over time, representing sort of 15 to 20% a reduction in use per person of potable water over the 30 years. My last slide is actually a repeat of the first, thinking that we might end on this slide. But what I will also do is step through the recommendations just so that we can make sure that those are understood before we go to questions. Are you able to do that, please, Suad? Thank you. Right, so these are the recommendations that the committee has in front of them today. So just to step through that and make sure that we're all on the same page.
And I might just, while you're saying that, I might just move those, and Councillor Cooper has indicated she'd like to second. And there is a brief change that I've let you know, Toby, in D3. But anyway, I'll let you carry on. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So the first recommendation that we have up there is a note. That is a note about the current 2025 target. So that's not a result of the water strategy. That's noting the 2025 target that Watercare have in their water care efficiency strategy. It's a target of 253 litres per person per day. We have a strategy at council group in order to deliver on that target. And B is a note about Auckland Council's contribution, and that it is on track to meeting that 2025 target. And that represents a 30% reduction in council's consumption of water based on 2015 by 2025. So those are just two notes about the 2025 target. The third note there is making sure that we're clear around our context for the Board of Inquiry. The D, this is the guts of the strategy recommendation. So DI is around a 2030 target, and the details that are listed there match the presentation, and of course they're sitting in the report. DI is the 2050 target. Oh, sorry, I should pause on DI, the 2030 target. That's a change for clarity. There's no change to the intent. We've just read that and reflected that it makes more sense to say that we are adopting a target of 13% or less network leakage. So that should say or less, just one catch there. And we're aiming for 11%. That 13% represents and reflects the LTP performance level. So DI is got that small change for clarity. DII is the 2050 target, and then DIII is a chair's recommendation. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, so that's just acknowledging that 2025 is what we are locking in, but over time, or even potentially part of the strategy, the team could work alongside Watercare on ways that potentially by 2050 we could beat that 225 litre gross per capita per day target. Yeah, so it's sort of like we shouldn't see 225 as the yay, we did it, but there could be, a whole lot of a number of things that we could be aiming. So it's just making sure we don't preclude any more work to reduce that target further. Cool.
Right. And then recommendation E is around, this is just a draw out that we are committed to achieving the 2030 and 2050 targets, and that there's some key investments already identified to give us confidence that we can move in that direction. And I note that Para 64 has a table around the smart meter rollout, which is a key investment program there, and then that's noting the current leakage target of 13% inside recommendation E. And then recommendation F is an opportunity to dig into the savings and the reduction in use per person that the drought might afford Auckland and the opportunity that might be in there. And so there's just a direction there for a report back to committee on the estimated savings from the drought and how best we go about locking some of that in a sustainable way. So that was just to make sure we've stepped through those, and happy to take questions and duck that to the presentation if needed.
Thanks, Toby. And I just changed F from direct to request. I just kind of don't like direct as the word, but also I'm not sure we can, but we'd prefer. Request sounds more of a two-way discussion, if that's right. Thank you both for the massive amount of work you've done on this. I know it's been huge the last few months. I will also acknowledge Marlon Bridge, Amanda Singleton, Rebecca Van Son and Chris Thurston in the room, but also you've been working alongside them, and also Chair Margaret Devlin and the board, this is what I think has been a fantastic partnership working together on this. I will also acknowledge the huge amount of work Watercare and the leadership they've taken, especially on the communications for the drought, and the fact what are we up to now? About 17 billion litres saved, which is massive, and that's all about that communication and the very clear messages we're sending to Aucklanders around water consumption. And even though we're not under those tighter restrictions, we're still seeing those savings. And I think this also shows that how we need to try and lock in some of that saving. And also, obviously, the work you've done in the Waikato space and the infrastructure space in quite a short time. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for being here. I'll put, if members don't mind, I might put Councillor Cooper first for a question, and then I've got a list.
Yeah, it was just, I want to also acknowledge, because these younger people have embraced at Watercare and in our Toby and Greer, these demand management changes much more readily, as because it's your future probably longer than ours. But I do want to acknowledge Watercare board and management for really starting to step up on this. It's been amazing. I think it's not so much transformation. I think we just didn't have a relationship as good as it is now, and it'll only get better. And I just want to acknowledge the work that's been done behind the scenes so we can make these decisions here today. It's been extraordinary, and I'm really, the wealth of talent is very inspiring. So thank you, Marlon, too, in your acting role. You've kept steering the ship and being willing to do this. But the question I have, probably more of Marlon, is are these targets doable? I think that's what's really important. We can't set something if it's not, even if it's a stretch, it's got to be doable.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Ngā mihi kia koutou. Yes, they are very challenging. I'll make no illusions about that. But I think it's these sorts of targets that inspire the innovation that's required, the change that's required to bring forward a different way of doing things. So I'm not going to put anyone under any misillusions about how difficult it will be, given the constraints around or our need to deliver both growth and resilience over the next 10 years. But this is certainly a focus, and right now I can say we have to commit to it.
Kia ora, thank you. So we'll go back to the question order. Councillor Newman.
Good morning. Good morning. I want to ask you, what happens when household consumption goes down and therefore revenue from volumetric water consumption goes down? The reduction in Watercare's revenue per household will require water prices to go up, won't it? Because the price path needs to respond to the change in projected revenue.
That is, Councillor Newman, that is a correct assumption. I mean, Watercare is substantially a fixed cost business, and there is a requirement to legislatively meet our costs collectively for all customers. So the challenge
there becomes about not necessarily putting up prices, but also looking at the other side of the equation, which is around how we can improve the efficiency of costs inside the business. So I wouldn't sit here and necessarily say, yes, as demand goes down, there's a consequential and equal increase in pricing.
The author of the report indicated that the infrastructure is required. We will still need to fund the infrastructure. The assets will be required, and the assets are a step change cost. That has to be met. It won't be met exclusively through growth charges. So it would be reasonable to say that you would need to forecast price increases to reflect changing volumetric revenue as consumption per household goes down, therefore impacting on Watercare's working capital?
Yes, that's a reasonable assumption to make, but without all the details of exactly what it means, I'm a little reluctant to give you the full answer.
Okay. With respect to Auckland Council, we would probably be, if not the largest, we would be very close to being one of the largest Watercare customers. To achieve the reduction in consumption for Auckland Council, what do we need to do? Much of the water that we consume, I think, would go towards watering sports fields, maintaining swimming pools. So tell me, how do we, as a council, achieve these very challenging targets, given the water that we consume is there for services and facilities that our community expect us to provide?
So it is a challenge. Community facilities are working hard on that exact issue. One of the great tools, additional tools, let alone the effort they're putting in to reduce demand, one of the great tools they're about to get is being part of Watercare Smart Meter program, which is targeting Watercare's largest users. And the trials that have happened already have shown what those smart meters can do to reduce demand. So that will be part of us achieving that goal.
When you say smart meters in the community facilities space, reducing demand, I mean, if I want to go for a swim or play rugby or cricket or something, I want to do that, notwithstanding what the meter says. So how does the community's expectation for the service and the meter, how can that be reconciled? The difficulty here is trying to get the community to respond to the price of the service, isn't it? I mean, that's the easiest way to address demand, is to price it or not provide the service.
I'm Amanda Singleton. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Watercare. You're absolutely right. We have to find a way of watering sports fields and parks and allowing water features to run more sustainably. And we are working very closely with Auckland Council to find non-potable solutions to these. So, for example, in the last couple of months, we've been drilling, I think, in the order of 50 bores around sports facilities to try and find a solution. And we're also currently investigating using recycled wastewater around Rosedale to water all the parks around Rosedale as a trial. And then, obviously, if it works, we would like to do more of that in future.
Yeah, I've got one more, if I may, because I think it would be fair to say that Auckland is probably one of the most sensitive regions when it comes to pricing water, given the rollout of metering. I don't know what the smart meter rollout will actually cost. I'd like to know the cost of that, but I'd just like to know what conversations Watercare having with Waikato District Council for your North Waikato customers. Are they moving to the same targets as we are here? Because I would assume that, are we leading the pack, or is everybody going the same direction as us? Because I have to say I'm struggling with D, given I don't know what the consequences of this will be. So tell me what's happening in the North Waikato with your customers here.
So we are leading the pack, and you've raised a very good point about the connection that Pōkeno and Tuakau have in relation to the draw of water from our sources. So I think that's a conversation I'll take away and have with Gavin Irons, Chief Executive of the Waikato District Council, as to how we can enable the targets to be aligned in what is a very aspirational 2050 projection.
Thank you. Toby or Korea, did you want to also talk about that? What we're already locking in the savings for an Auckland Council whānau already. Kirk and team are working quite, they've already sort of locking those in pre-2025 anyway. Did you want to touch on that at all, or?
I think you, thank you, Councillor. I think you summarised it well. So Auckland Council is on track to make its contribution to the targets that are before you in the paper, including the note for A. So Auckland Council is on track for its 30% reduction on those 2015 consumption of water targets by 2025. So that's one point. I just also take the opportunity to just make sure that there isn't a message in there. I just know, Councillor Newman, you made a comment there about Auckland has been sensitive to price. So just to reiterate that the pathway that we have here is not envisaging a increase in the bill to a water care customer. This isn't using price in that manner. Appreciate your point there about the per unit cost may need to change based on the business model itself. But that is obviously as a result of people buying less units. So there's a lot to be worked through there and a lot of information that needs to be gathered over time, for sure. But that's not the intent of the pathway itself. And we will be looking to learn from the experience of these targets over time to mitigate against that.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
I've got a few questions, and I guess the context of where I'm coming from is the climate emergency that we've signed up to, and council as a whole. So I have some issues with a number of the targets. Quite obviously, you did point out that there are other cities that are doing much better than us, especially around cities that are part of the water sensitive cities network. So one question I've got is, can we actually engage with them directly and look to have maybe some form of peer review along the lines of the peer review that we had around our stormwater and the like some years ago, and that was quite revealing and caused a step change in council's approach, I would suggest. Might have even helped to bring about healthy waters as it is now. So just a question around engagement and best practice, particularly water sensitive cities. Can we do that, and how quickly could we do that?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I heard 2 points. I'll just address the first around perhaps like the ambition of those targets. I think it's probably important to note that for the 2030 target, that's a hard ask. And one of the reasons that 2030 target is a hard ask is the benefits of these sorts of initiatives, they accrue over time. So over a longer term time horizon, the 30 years out to 2050, you've got your residential smart meters in place, you've got water efficiency education going on for that 30-year period. You're really building up the savings per person. That's one of the reasons why we're here today, to start that journey, signal that we're making those investments in things like leakage and smart meters in order to build up those benefits over time. So I think we should see 2030 as an ambitious, doable, with some grunt and effort target. But I do take your point on the 2050. And I think we were trying to say this in our presentation, is that if council so chose, we could refine, and I think perhaps this is where you're going with your chair's rec, Councillor Hills, there is room for more ambition, there is room for more thinking, and that might be something that we're able to bring back to you. But I just want to make that point about the 2030 target. On the second point around the water sensitive cities, we're looking to engage water sensitive cities. and go through a benchmarking process. So yes, that is something that we are able to progress, and so that work is underway to go through that process.
So how quickly could we do that to inform this process? They would be up for it, for example. Have we made a direct approach to them, asked to join the network, engaged with Auckland University around collaborative participation and so on? Have we made some steps?
Yeah, so that work is underway, and just to make the note that that's around the water strategy as a whole. So it's not just specifically on this piece before you today.
The other question that I've raised earlier, informing this process around leakage, is our leakage right now is 13%. I'm making the assumption, and I have been asking for this information around district metering, that the leakage in specific parts of Auckland must be as high as maybe 30 or 40%. I'd like to have the information around that, because I'm making the assumption that we're not getting leakage in all of the new areas where we're putting a network. Therefore, a high percentage of that leakage must be coming from older parts of Auckland, and that leakage must be huge. It may be even impacting on infrastructure and causing deterioration and the like through water ingress. Can we have that information? Because based on that information, we might say that that target is woefully inadequate. So I'm just conscious, Mr. Chair, that we need to be much better informed than what we are. So that's a question around leakage. I have asked that question before. Any response to?
Yes, you are correct. You have asked that question. I thought that information had been provided, so I'll make sure you get it today.
Okay.
But in terms of district matters, yes, you are also correct in that it is a lot of the older suburbs. Maungakiki comes to mind as a network which is volcanic, and when leaks occur, they don't surface. So there is those sorts of challenges with the infrastructure.
Thank you.
The other question I've got...
Maybe last question there, and then we'll go around the circle.
Okay, well, these are significant questions.
Absolutely.
As the largest user of water in the Auckland region, that's the Auckland Council family, are we informing ourselves around how we could save water? And it's well known, for example, that if you look at the production of milk and beef, for example, to produce a kilo of meat, you use between 5,000 to 20,000 litres of water. We're a big farmer. We're not in the business of milk as they are in the Waikato, where the use of water there for agriculture, in particular animal agriculture, must be absolutely staggering. But just as it goes to the commercial part of the exercise, where we've got some targets, are those targets anywhere near stretched as they could be, particularly if we started making some structural changes, for example, in our farming practices and the like? So I've just got a question there around just how we as a council could shape some of these targets ourselves. The other related question that goes to this that I have raised is around best practice and the requirement that some other cities have, that industry that wants to take water has to demonstrate that it has best practice.
Keep in mind, Councillor Walker, that these targets are around potable water from the water care supply system as well. So
and in the presentation, these targets refer to residential water and also commercial water. Those targets are in there. I think the target around commercial is around, 53 litres per...
yeah, absolutely.
57 point...
we'll get an answer
53.
Here, but we aren't... Yeah, but when you speak about farms and our farms, that is not potable water.
Yes, it is. In a number of our farms, for example, Shakespeare, other farms, many of our farms are in the urban network. We use substantial quantities of water.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so I think as Councillor Hills was saying, we haven't looked at water footprint for what Auckland produces. We're just working on that network water. We have been conservative in how commercial will trend over the 30 years, just as we have been conservative in the other parts of our assumptions. And And we've said it's a 15% reduction. That commercial will, as population grows, there will be a 15% reduction in commercial demand. And that, in terms of best practice you mentioned, we're fortunate to be working with Amanda because she is working with those large users and they're reporting a much higher reduction in demand than that within their businesses. So we know that 15% is conservative. But that is not to say that commercial activity is constrained. That's actually really tracking a trend that's already occurring over the last decade and, in fact, over 40 years or more, that industry in Auckland is getting more and more water efficient.
Just the last question, Mr. Chair, and again, I've raised this issue before, and that's around the energy content in the water. I think in the 16-17 year, Watercare bought 115 gigawatts. That's on the Watercare site for energy, and the cost of energy is escalating dramatically. If we save water, we save substantial amounts of energy across the Auckland region, and we as a council save a lot of money. So even if our revenue from water isn't so great, we're making some big savings. Is it possible to report on those things in these targets so that we're informing ourselves? Because again, this goes to our climate emergency targets. Auckland Council, for example, is probably by far and away one of the biggest energy users in the region.
Yeah, the answer is yes, Councillor Walker. We can do that. I mean, and just to give some context to commercial users, I do want to talk about the one of the constraints that is out there around legislation. If we talk about, you mentioned dairy farmers. Well, I can tell you that the chicken industry in Auckland is probably the biggest in New Zealand, with Teagle and others supplying most of New Zealand, and they're limited to 4 litres per chicken or 5 litres per chicken. So even though they can produce a more efficient solution, legislation is driving that, just as it is with the fresh foods industries, lettuce, as with pharmaceutical companies as well. So there are some constraints driving demand, even though the technology is better.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Henderson. Thank you. Look, I take some umbrage with the target of 11% leakage, and I'll sort of refer to point 26 of the report and ask you to sort of understand, maybe explain more the economic level of leakage. What are you taking into account with that phrase? And I'll reserve my right to speak on that. And just before I throw the question out, I don't want to be a fly in the ointment, but I do have a little bit of difficulty with D1 and 2, in that we've got our targets and our leakage targets all in the one thing. I'm okay with the targets. I'm not okay with the leakage targets, but I'll see what the answer to the questions are. So, yeah, ultimately, can you please explain economic level of leakage?
You want to talk?
So the economic level of leakage is the amount of leakage that it will save you money by reducing the leakage. So if you can spend to save to a certain point and then it gets too expensive.
So does that take into account damage, as Councillor Walker alluded to, caused by water ingress on public and private property?
I think what I'd just say here is we don't have a methodology yet as council for economic level of leakage. Like, that's an excellent question, and there are others there too. Not that you need me to tell you that was an excellent question. And I think the important piece here is there is work underway, and it will be delivered Watercare and council jointly around how we understand the economic level of leakage. And you'll see in the report we try to achieve a balance where we have an inkling of where it might be, and that's the 11%. That's an indication of what it might look like. It may be different. And we need to think about what goes into that assessment, exactly to your point, in order to arrive at something that looks like a spend to save model that takes into account what we actually want it to, rather than perhaps taking a narrow focus, which is what I can hear in your question.
Just one more follow-up, if that's okay. There will be public concern around baking in a target of 11% or below, because I've already had it. So what would you say back to community concerns that actually we shouldn't have such a high level of leakage.
Sorry, I think we went under. You're asking for a lower than 11. Oh, was that what you're leading to? Right. Got it.
Okay, now I understand. Yeah, so look, leakage is something that water utilities around the world battle with, and of course it's, there's dependencies based on where you are in the world in managing that. Watercare have sustained something around 13% for the last few years. It's been trending slightly up. What this target does is it pushes performance in that area, and 11% is our current proxy for that economic level of leakage. I think what we can say there is that's under review, and we'll be able to come back with whether a lower percentage is possible, and that's why we've worded it as less. I think we just need to be cognizant of that requires investment. It really does require a substantial investment to get lower than what perhaps even an economic level of leakage may be.
Okay, I'll sit here and contemplate that point while other people ask questions, but I've got just one more question, if that's okay, Chair. Where does water recycling fit into this, water reuse?
They're all in the mix, just as desalination is, but the technologies are currently, I suppose desalination is too expensive at the moment, and it has trended down from I'd say costs have reduced by about 75% over the last 10 years, so it is coming in the right direction. Water recycling is a little different because, again, there's a journey around legislation and the need to inform customers. We've started that journey now, so we're in the initial phases of what I would call investigation and information. So, yes, it is on the radar. We're probably talking a 10 to 15-year journey, though, to get the right legislation in place. Consumer attitudes toward it's changing, so there's a number of factors that make it work.
But to say you are currently working on non-potable uses for our recycled water as a starter anyway, that's... Mayor Goff.
Thanks. I've just got a couple of supplementary questions to earlier answers and then a couple of other substantive questions. You talked before, Mark, about you'd be losing money if there was a decline in demand, but the decline in demand is per capita, not absolute. So I just want you to comment on that. I mean, obviously you're spreading the demand over wider users and there might be higher costs per capita, but I'd like you to comment on that for sake of filling out the picture. Secondly, I think it was Toby that said a couple of times, we're not using pricing to force down demand. I accept that you're not increasing prices to force down demand, but you are increasing prices by 7 and 9%, 9.5%, and that must have an impact on demand because it's noticeably higher. You might like to comment on that. I'll leave those, I'll ask all the questions together and you can address them together. The first question is, you've got that last year we were using 286 litres per day pre-drought, and then you set out for us targets for 2025, 2030 and 2050, but you haven't set out what we've achieved already. I've done a quick back of the envelope calculation with all the errors and emissions that might involve, and I figure that we're probably already down from 286 to about 260 million litres a day, but I'd just like you to confirm that. That's my, year 10 maths. It might not have worked out like that. Secondly, if you achieve the level of demand you've got, what does that do in terms of the timing for the $500 million you've got to spend on a new water pipeline to Tuakau if you to fully utilise the extra water we might get from the Board of Inquiry? And how does it impact on the long-term option, I think it was partly Shane Henderson's question, the long-term option of recycling our waste? So that's question 2. And my last question is this. You've provided quite a nice outline, I don't have the slides numbered by page, on the comprehensive assessment of demand initiatives. But what we haven't got is a comparable or a comparative impact and cost of those options. where you go through network leakage, on-site capture for irrigation, smart meters, washing machines, toilets, etc. And it would be nice to know which, because you're looking for a cost-benefit ratio on which of those levers you should be pulling, but it would also be nice to know at a household level. If I know that I'm using 40% of the water in my household for showers, then I might think of putting a showerhead inhibitor in. And I'm just wondering if you are going to give us something both in the overall sense of which of those levers are most important. So, if we were to require retention tanks already in the ground to be plumbed into the house, what would that cost and what would the benefit be? That sort of thing. Because if we're out to persuade people to reduce demand, we need them to know where they get the best bang for the buck from. Thank you. Sorry, that's quite a lot.
Yeah. Shall I start? Oh, you. Look, so let me try and address all those questions for you, Mayor. The price increase one, I'll pick on that one first. So increasing prices does have an impact on demand, but it's relatively inelastic. So the latest studies show that for a 10% increase in price, you get a 1% drop in demand. So it's not a 10% for a 10%.
So why did water meters so drastically reduce water usage per capita?
Because that was a different situation where you weren't metered and then you were informed. So that was at the moment, Aucklanders are the best users of water in New Zealand because they're the most informed about their consumption. Around the country, for example, Christchurch, they don't have meters and they're one of the highest users of water, and at 360 litres per person, let alone the 150 that we're saying Aucklanders use, 168. So it's a slightly different argument. I'm a big advocate of metering and smart metering, but unfortunately around the country they're not. So in terms of deferrals of investment for the likes of a Christchurch or even some of the other bigger centres, Tauranga has seen a massive decrease in their consumption as a result of putting in infrastructure, which has led to deferrals of investments by upwards of 10 years. So slightly different argument. Hopefully I've addressed your question. Yeah, okay. In terms of the consumption to date, demand has dropped. 286 you mentioned down to 260. I had around 8%, so we're pretty close in terms of the numbers. So great maths. And so I think yes, the challenge is making that permanent and a permanent change in behaviour, and we're seeing it through industry. I think there's a bit of work to go to make sure that's a permanent change to residential behaviours. As we saw in the 93 drought, we saw a significant decrease, but 3 years later we started seeing it creep back up. And we didn't have the right tools at the time to challenge that. I think we do now, but again, it's part of a massive education campaign. In relation to the spend required, the 500 million required on the pipeline for the Waikato, I think there's a need for us to inform councillors on why we would need that. And one of the aspects is definitely demand will help reduce supply if we then divert away from the Waikato as a source. But ultimately right now, there is a resilience requirement in terms of the fact that currently a third of Auckland's water supply is coming through this pipeline and there is only one pipeline. So there are challenges. This pipeline is designed for 100 years plus, but however, if it breaks, we're a bit exposed at the moment, and we need to look at alternatives to increasing that resilience. In relation to the biggest bang for buck in terms of residentials, I'm waiting for others to fill in gaps here, but I'll talk as we go. But from what I know, outdoor use is one of the biggest contributors. So yes, having tanks for stormwater is a big contributor. Again, the challenges in summer when they're not full, but that's a peak issue. And the other two big providers there are around showers and washing machines. So yes, there is a way to make that more focused, and I'm going to hand over to council staff at that point.
I'll pick up on that point then. So that we've in the work to date, we've described that the things that pay you back more than the cost of the item, like shower heads, as the levelised cost. and we can represent that to you as a follow-up to the meeting, if that's satisfactory. Yes, cool, yeah. Was there?
Forgive me if there was also a question in there, Mayor, about what about the next source and how we're thinking about that, and how does something like a high cost recycled water, like direct recycled water, or perhaps desalination, how does that factor in?
Yeah. If we achieve what we want through demand management, when does that require us to come in with those alternative sources, whether it be desalination under new technology or the reuse of wastewater, the purification of wastewater?
Yeah, and obviously the relationship there is around the per capita consumption and the population growth over time. And I think, and we've done some modelling, and members will remember in the previous workshops and the memos that were circulated, we have an understanding of what that could look like. I think the key point is the application to the Waikato River and the pipeline there and the water coming into Auckland, that's, if I can use the term, short-term, over a long-term horizon. What the demand management reduction does over the long term is whatever that next source is, we begin to defer it as the demand per person goes down. And what that tends to do in the space of something like reuse and desal is it gives us time to plan, but additionally the cost of that sort of thing is coming down. And one of the reasons it's doing that is this is a common problem around the world. So there's an element of reducing demand and reaping the benefits of that over the long term that this allows for.
I guess, sorry, Mr. Chairman, more specifically, if we achieve the goals that you've set, and acknowledging that you've set them quite conservatively, how much extra time, how far further could we defer, for example, the really undertaking the work that needs to be done in order to recycle wastewater? I accept Marlon's argument about the need for resilience, and one point of entry when you're using a third of the water does put us at risk. That's a good argument, but I'm just wondering about the reuse, and does it put it back a decade, does it put it back 2 decades, or maybe you haven't done the work?
We were just talking about like how precise can we be here. We've done some preliminary work. It's looking more like inside 2050 there's another source without this demand management, and then what this demand management might be able to do is push that back a decade or so. So again, imprecise. It's something that you learn about over time, and smart meters and tracking and targets, they all help you do that sort of a thing. I think that sounds, yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I have to trust you in some respects along this. This is, not my area of expertise, but I have 2 questions, and one to you, Mr. Chair, and one to Watercare. My first is to you. So I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the first bullet point in D, because the original resolution asked for 11% or less network leakage. A lot of people have talked about network leakage, and you're leaving it at 13%, which is where it is currently. And this is 10 years away from now. You're saying, actually, 13 or less. I actually think the original recommendation was better, which was 11 or less. And so I'm just sort of asking you again, why are you not more ambitious with your suggestion that we leave their current leakage statistics at their current levels?
I'll get Megan to answer, but firstly, I guess we've worked alongside Watercare on this, and we want to work with them on actual things we will achieve, or they are going to ask us for significant budget to achieve something that might be unachievable. So I'm happy to pass to Megan and then maybe go to Marlon, but I would prefer there be 0 leakage, but I know that
0 is unrealistic, but
yeah.
It was originally 11. So someone's written this report saying it should be 11. Why are you upping it?
No, I'm not up. Well,
I'll just ask Toby. So just to be clear, this was a change that we requested. So that small change in 1.
Yeah.
3 was the chair's rec. So we need to respond to that.
Okay.
Thanks.
I couldn't tell. Sorry, it was both in bed. So.
No problem. Yeah.
Yeah, and so just on that point, there's a change that the team here are seeking for clarity. So put my hand up to wording that strangely. What we need to acknowledge here is 13% is in the LTP proposal, the 2021 LTP, and so that's the funded target, if you like. What we're trying to acknowledge and appreciate the kind of hedging your bets here with including the 11%, what we're trying to acknowledge is we've got ongoing work around the economic level of leakage, that spend to save model. We also have some proactive leakage work that's showing some really good results for water care over the last 18 months or so. We know about district metering, and there was some comment earlier about how that might help prioritise where investment goes when we think about reducing leakage. So there's a sense that there may be an opportunity to perform better than the level of service in the LTP, but the LTP level of service at 13 is what's funded. Is that clear? Yeah, thank you, Councillor, for the question.
Yeah, I just think you better have a damn good comms department. That's all I'll say on that one. My second question is, where does the actual grey water legislation fit into all this? You know, because I mean, I just, in my area, you may or may not be familiar with the suburb of Stonefields, and the original development had grey water, was all set to go, rah, couldn't work because there was no, central government legislation. Are we doing any lobbying or any, I know that you're talking to government about other things, but are we doing, how does this potable water stuff sit in that grey water legislation?
The new regulator, Taumata Arawai, has just come into being, and Watercare are having discussions with Taumata Arawai about that exact thing, that those regulations need to be changed. Taumata Arawai have said that's not, the purpose of them being set up is to improve drinking water standards across New Zealand, and that wouldn't be a priority for them, but they are very happy for Auckland Council and Watercare to do the work in collaboration with Taumata Arawai to get that through, because it is a priority for Auckland, but may not be for the rest of the country. Sorry, that Auckland would be pushing that regulation change, where Taumata Arawai wouldn't necessarily be doing it for the country.
If we could quickly, Marlon, do you want to just, on the leakage, because, I would love to put 11% as the only, but would you be able to talk about, from Watercare's perspective, of what that would mean if we did that? If we just chucked in 11 and said you had to reach it? A minimum, yeah.
Yeah, look, I can only add weight to the fact that it would be reasonably expensive. I do have some numbers. I'm happy to talk about them in detail if you want, but but I suppose I can only talk about the work we did in 2013-14 around economic levels of leakage, and we're updating some of that work now, and we're revising it to cater for today rather than in the future rather than yesterday. But that indicated around 10.6 was the economic level of leakage. So at that point, for every dollar you're spending, you're not getting $1 back. So from a Watercare perspective, there is a big pathway to get to that number, and there's an even bigger pathway if you want to go beyond that number, and that's one of the challenges, Councillor Henderson, we've got. No, it's not. No, look, it's a matter of 80-20, right? So you can spend a lot of the money now and you'll address areas that have high leakage and getting that sorted, but it's that last 20% that takes the most amount of 80% of the cost. Look, I would, our ballpark number, we're talking $500 million.
So thank you, Madam Chair, for securing that 500 million. Finance Chair. Thank you. I'm just not sure if there are other comments that have just come, or are we? No. Okay. Thank you. Right. Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Thanks, team. Hey, Chair, is there another motion under the F? Can we just scroll? F. So F is the G that's referred to at paragraph 30, I think. Is that? I'm just trying to reconcile that. I think it is. at paragraph 30, there's a mention of a G, but I think it's what you've got as an F. I'm just...
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, that's... And just going back, point the Mayor made, really, takes me to motion B. Can we go back up again? It does question what the Mayor's raising is really, is B worthy of having? That's a pretty fundamental question. Is B worthy of having when it feels like it's a little bit of a packaging, actually, a nice Christmas wrap. Is B relevant? 2015. Why aren't we using, today's 20 or 21 numbers, or at least 20, as our baseline?
Well, we're saying we're saving 30% on our 2015 water use. So effectively, it's higher than if we use today's figures.
Okay,
so
question
Toby,
sorry.
Yeah.
Is it really relevant?
Our intention with A and B is to note the existing 2025 targets. So those targets are part of what's called the Water Care Efficiency Strategy, and they have a target there of the 253 litres per person gross, and that's in A there, and Water Care's commitments to achieving that. B is really saying that Auckland Council is also on track to meeting that 2025 target. So just the inclusion of 2015 might be the confusing point there. It's just to say how we've... So what that strategy does is it uses the 2015 number, says let's take 30% off the top, and cool.
Moving to more important things. Thank you. So just, Toby, did I hear you say earlier that this pathway is global good practice or global best practice?
Sorry, Suad, can we go to that slide? I use the term global good practice.
Right. Okay, I think you were very careful in using global good practice, yet Marlon, you said this is a very aspirational 2050 projection. So then we go to that slide. If I look at who's accompanying us there, their targets aren't 2050 targets. Their targets are Singapore, our buddies in that category, 2020, Anglian Water 2024. Mind you, there's a lot going on in English and Scottish Water at the moment to bring forward those targets. Scottish Water 2030. So when we look at our neighbours there, they're not talking about 2050. They're talking much, much earlier. So I guess my question is, how is this close to world best practice? How is this pathway remotely close? Because there's another slide in your document here where it really confirms this as a very middle of the road outcome. And over on that left-hand side, there are cities right now that have domestic per capita water consumption of under 100 and leakage rates of 7% right now. Chair, I want us to be the best in the world, not the best average in the world. And I just want to explore this a bit. How come we're heading to become the best average water efficient city in the world?
I'll start, thank you, Councillor Darby, by just acknowledging that, while we're trying to get a perspective on global best practice, we have to acknowledge that, territories are extremely different. If I take Singapore, for example, they live very differently to Auckland, who has the highest per capita boating ownership in the world. Those boats are washed, they take water out on them, and Singaporeans don't have that to the extent that we have it. They live in high rises predominantly. We live in big backyards with gardens. So I think we just probably in the next iteration of a presentation, and when we finalise the strategy, need to find a peer group that are more like us and not just the best in terms of consumption, because I think it does skew perceptions when we are comparing ourselves to Singapore, for example. I'm just speaking on one in that category.
Maybe, I think Marlon did you have, or Toby have a comment on that as well?
Yeah, look, I was just going to add some richness to the Singapore discussion, because they are highly motivated to get demand down because they're buying their water from across the border. So they buy it all from Malaysia. So each of these cities, we could go through and identify some specific characteristics that drive demand in each of those regions, Copenhagen, all these other cities that are doing very well. I think if you give us the opportunity to, over the next few months, is come back with what we think are consistently the same types of cities. So Vancouver comes to mind as an opportunity for us to share and look at how we're doing against them. Not to let us off the hook, but just to give us some comparison, if that's okay.
Yeah, well, look, bodies like Water Sensitive Cities and the International Water Association, I think, are worthy of tapping into, rather than just cherry-picking cities that actually fit our arguments. I think that's a risk. So look, my core question here is, are we entirely confident by signing up to this pathway of consumption and leakage, are we entirely confident that that's going to deliver a climate resilient and low carbon urban water for us in the future? Because if I look at your report, it actually says we're not.
Yeah, sorry. You're referring to the assessment that we're able to do of the
table options. 2, I think it is.
Yeah, I think, and that's related to, I think, your first line of questioning. So just to make a couple of points, when we think about our comparative, I would have potentially answered that question slightly differently, or just to add to the way that we've answered your first question. What you're seeing on the screen here are global bands of world-leading best practice, good practice, and so on. And I think, there's a context here for Auckland that over the next 30 years, it's really possible to deliver some of that growth much more like the bottom left-hand side of this graph here, so something in that world-leading space. What we're talking about with our targets is the average, right? So we're talking about new development, new users, new Aucklanders, new behaviours, the customers of the future, armed with a smart meter and a smart meters app and more information. We might know more about the way that we can target leaks and so on. There's really an opportunity here to deliver the growth for Auckland and accommodate the population growth and the change in Auckland much more in that space. So I just wanted to make sure that we pop that in there as well, that your comments around are we striving to be an average going forward. I think what we need in order to bring down that average consumption really is some of that best practice and so on. So there's just that point to make. And then, of course, you mentioned the Water Sensitive Cities has a goal there of about 200 growth. And you can see that in the presentation where and I will jump to the next slide. I think what you're getting at here is, over the 30 years, how do we refine our targets for 2050 such that they are, going down in this wedge? And that's about the learning that we do in our pursuit of those targets over time. And I think what we're trying to do here is the first step. There's information that becomes more available to us through programs like the metering system that informs the levers that council might want to pull to make us climate resilient and to make us potentially have a more distributed capture, a network with more distributed capture, so that we are more resilient to those disruptions that I think you're talking about there. So I think today is a first step about, and it's a good news story about the efforts that we're making to reduce per capita consumption, and then provide ourselves with the ability to keep being aspirational about what that looks like over time.
Okay. Okay, and one small question, Chair. Marlon, just in terms of the leakage, which we're around 13.7, and that has been growing. What is the actual value? What is the value lost? That is revenue. We're not selling that water. So what is the value overall of that, the 0 to 13.7, and what is the value from the economic point of, 10.6 to 13.7? Do you have any rough idea of how many millions of dollars we're letting go?
So there's 80 million litres of water a day that's not being utilised in our networks, and the price of water is $1.55. So there's your economic impact of not utilising that water. And in terms of the percentage, then it's the differential between 10.6 and 13.7. So I can work that out if you need an absolute number. 80 million litres at $1.55 per 1,000 litres per cube.
Councillor Deputy Chair Coombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora koutou. I think my questions have been answered on the way through, but I just wanted to be really clear. In terms of why we're not pursuing a world best practice target, in the report at page 51, it just gives the comparators and says what the recommended per capita per day is, and then says what the Water Cities Index recommends, without sort of saying why we're not pursuing that target. But I think it has been, I mean, you've thrown in quite a lot of things into the mix about why, about the cost. We're not comparing apples and apples. So I understand, but it's not like, it would be really good to have a clear statement about we're doing best practice in terms of our position in the world. Well, that's what we want to aim for, but we're not doing what World Cities Index is. So, yeah. So, I mean, I just, is there a quick summary as to why we're not pursuing it?
Yeah, I think, we tried to address that in the report in para 56, if I can point people to it, or I can read it out. We're advising that, look, more ambitious sets of targets and a more ambitious and involved pathway of initiatives is possible. Achieving greater water savings than the targets that you have in front of you is possible, but it would require additional funding. So there's a funding component here, and we don't make this decision divorced from the context that council sits in right now. And then additionally, there are costs and benefits for Aucklanders, and we've had some discussion. Councillor Henderson touched on this point around understanding some of the broader benefits or broader components that we would take into account when we're thinking through things like economic leakage. So there's just a sentence here, and just trying to make this point that costs and benefits for Aucklanders from those additional demand management initiatives that would be required to have a more ambitious target. That requires a lot of work and money. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm very happy to support the recommendations, and I don't need to speak again, but I just wanted just a quick clarification. I mean, it's good to see in the recommendation that it talks about the target being equal or better than, and I think, is that picking up on the conversation we had at workshop? And Marlon, you also mentioned that it isn't a target of what we're trying to achieve. That's the top limit of, we wanted to achieve better than that.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think principally that's the feedback.
Yeah, great. So thank you for including that. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Member Wilcox.
The more you've talked, the more questions have kind of popped into my mind, so it's just a little bit confusing. So I'll just go back to my first question, and it really relates to my statement last week as to why we have to be like Sydney or Melbourne. I've done the living in the drought story, and hooking up hoses to washing machines to try and get extra water and all that stuff. So it's not as if I'm not aware of how we can do grey water. And I suppose that's where I want to go. I visited the home show at the North Shore in the weekend, and 1,000 litre tank costs $1,000. And you extrapolate that over Auckland, that's a lot of litres of water. And I'm still trying to understand why I'm using drinking water to flush human waste down the toilet, down the pipes. I'm struggling to see that, struggling to understand that kaupapa. And I'm wondering, because in your PowerPoint there's a 0.5 there about having off-network water catchment. How are we advocating this within council? Because I joined this committee, I was really reticent to join this committee, but I joined this committee to make a difference. And I'm wondering, so how are we advocating this to other council committees? Because, putting something like every new house has to have a stormwater proposal, or every new house has to have a tank, whether it's 1,000 litres or 20 litres. There's a yin and yang with that, we know already, it's $1,000 extra it's going to cost you. There's a different set of plumbing and all the rest. But how are we advocating this? How is this committee, and how are you advocating this to planning committee so that we can actually get this done? Because otherwise, I think we're twiddling. And I went on to the Americans, because they're the most useful. They use every ounce of water they can get hold of. They're using 86 litres a day in flushing toilets. The average person in the US. Don't know what they're doing with it, but that's the way they go. So I want to think that we can save 86 litres just by having stormwater retention and running that. But we're talking about water care here, but we're not talking about non-network kaupapa. And to me, water care, yeah, you get your thing, get your house in order, but there's also a non-network kaupapa that needs to be done parallel, and I'm not seeing that in these recommendations, and I see number 5, but where does that go? And what's the plans to do that? And I'm guessing there's legislation as well. But if you're not connected to the network, you're using stormwater anyhow. You're using water off your roof to flush your toilets, unless you're using a long drop.
Thank you for your comments and questions there, Member Wilcox. So just for clarity, I think you're referring to 0.5 here, yeah, where we're looking at the requirement to. So currently you've got existing requirements for stormwater detention tanks, and then you're drawing out that we're suggesting as part of that pathway that there be a policy change where we go from a detention tank to a retention tank and move that through as a way of substituting potable water for non-potable, such as the water that's sitting in your system. And then can I just ask, is the question that you're asking here, the recommendations are not directing staff to make sure that policy change is implemented? Is that the ask?
Well, do we have that policy? I'm not even sure if we have that policy. That's the first thing. And if we do have that policy, how is it being advocated?
Yeah, so the intention, so we don't have the policy to require that it be plumbed in. What we've modelled is that the detention tanks that are already installed, they would be plumbed in. They would be turned into retention tanks. So we've modelled that as part of the pathway, one of the ways that we bring down consumption over time. This would require a policy change here at Council, achieved through the unitary plan. This conversation here, these targets, they will require us to make these changes and do the work, and we've listed there, we've given ourselves till 2025 to achieve that change.
What 4 years to get a policy change? Is that what we're saying?
So just to reiterate on that, we've been really clear throughout, we've embedded conservative assumptions. If we can do that faster, then we will.
So, Chair, I think that's what I'm getting at is, I mean, if we think we can do it faster, why aren't we? And why aren't we getting onto the planning committee to make it happen? I mean, I just did the back of the toothbrush calculation as well, and that worked out at, you know, forgive me with the numbers, but I worked it out that just in 1 week you'd save about 250 million or 250 megalitres or something, you know. I mean, the numbers are astronomical. You know, this is going on the Americans, of course, but, you know, the numbers are astronomical, and I don't understand why we're not doing this and trying to make this happen in new housing now. Because the boom is now, it won't be in 10 years' time, it'll be a different type of boom.
Yeah, I guess, thank you, Member Wilcox. I have asked this before, and of course, through the Planning Committee, they do have a plan change going through around not requiring a resource consent for a tank, but whether we can require it, I don't know if that is the responsibility of this committee, but Toby, if we added a resolution, maybe Megan, if we added a resolution for the Planning Committee to require that, can we do that, or is that not within this? Talking number 5.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we could recommend, if you wanted to recommend some actions coming out of this discussion. The other element here is that this is just one part of the water strategy we're taking and talking to you about. We've got 5 other work streams, 5 other elements that gives you that holistic look on water. And this is not me delaying, I'm just saying that we could recommend to Planning Committee to discuss that, or we could also do it as part of perhaps a more holistic package, you know, as part of the water strategy work itself, and other matters that may also need changing over time.
So yeah, it would be great if we had, especially from Member Wilcox's point, that we actually had it in there. It's in the presentation, it's in the report, but if we had a resolution that went to Planning Committee to require all stormwater tanks to be also connected into grey water, non-potable sources, I think Councillor Darby seems happy with that, so that'll be supplementary. Well, you're in the next question, Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, can I just get clarification? Would I need a building consent to plumb the stormwater or grey water tank back into the household? I would need a building consent for that work. So, yeah, so okay. We'll need a process for issuing all those consents to the population of Auckland, because that's, you know, thank you.
The part of the issue is we cannot change that, that's a government change. But as part of building consents, it could be part of, if it's new builds, that's not as difficult as it sounds, as far as I understand. So Councillor Darby does have the first one underway for the plan change to not require resource consent, but that doesn't negate a building consent, which is not our remit. Was there another comment? No? Speak? Okay, so I just had a few questions just on, so I see there's differing sides in the room, you know, and I guess my push has been for lower, but we are working together on this. What other sort of figures we would be talking to if we were to go stronger targets and stronger leak, just say? Is it just the 500 million, Marlon, on the leaks, or do we sort of have figures for getting to those water sensitive cities? Well, that work hasn't been done because we know it's too much.
Full extent of that work hasn't been done. I mean, we've got estimates on renewals required and some of the other aspects to make it more efficient, but there's a whole heap of things we could undertake which we just haven't got the details on.
Thank you. Well, so we've got comments now. I will kick off with Councillor Desley Simpson.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I'm going to support this with regret, actually, if I could put it that way. And I do so because I think the targets should be a lot more ambitious. But we are constrained by our debt, and I acknowledge that. So to you, yeah, I'd love them to be higher, but I'll just say, I think we need to keep, I think through Bill's committee, the CCO monitoring committee, we keep an eye on this kind of stuff more often, and I think we've got to maybe look to having a report more regularly on this, other than just once every, 10-year targets, 30-year, 50-year, 2030, 2050 rather. I think we just need to keep an eye on this. I mean, we all want to be New Zealand leaders, and indeed world leaders when it comes to water. But it's a terrible time for council, financially, for our group family, to try and deliver on that. So, as I said, with regret, I will support. And the regret is only because I'd love to be more ambitious.
Thank you. Councillor Walker, comment?
Sorry, yes. I just want to speak to this first, Mr. Chair, and that's on item 5. I really haven't seen much information on that, but I've got direct experience around this particular issue. Often these stormwater tanks that are used for detention have got relatively dirty water. If you plumb that water into your toilet system, it messes up the valves, and your toilet system then leaks and wastes phenomenal quantities of water. In addition to that, sometimes the cost of doing that sort of work in homes is horrendous. So, I mean, this just goes to the general theme of my comment, which is that I think that this particular item should be deferred. If it is going to be put up, I will be voting against it, because I think that the targets aren't anywhere near realistic in terms of what we could and should be achieving, particularly in the context of a climate emergency. I've raised a number of issues around benchmarking with other cities. Councillor Darby has mentioned that. I've put the suggestion that we engage directly with water-sensitive cities and the like and inform ourselves. That has not happened. I have a real concern that if we adopt these measures, we're effectively adopting something that's subpar, really subpar, and I don't want to be party to that, particularly given, as I mentioned earlier, the huge energy costs associated with water consumption that go to meeting our carbon reduction targets. So, one, I'm making the suggestion that we defer this. If that is not the case, my recommendation to other councillors is frankly to vote against it, unless you're really confident that it's the right way to go. So that will be my stance, Mr. Chair.
Are there any more comments? Councillor Henderson. Yeah, just briefly, you had me at $500 million. That's my comment. Look, I don't love 11%, and I definitely don't love 13% in terms of leakage targets. And my community don't love it either. I actually get lobbied quite a lot about this. But I'm taking your advice that we're working on it. And I'm just going to say that I'll keep asking about those targets over the term, but I'm happy to vote it through on that advice. Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Newman.
Yeah, look, I'll need to register my vote against D Roman numeral 1, please, Chair. I thought that, respectfully, Councillor Darby, I thought that some of your comments were a little unkind. I do think that there is a very genuine attempt to explain where we are in the continuum, and there are reasons for that. So I think that the report is a pretty honest attempt. Councillor Walker has expressed his view in relation to not supporting these because he doesn't think the targets are ambitious enough. I'll be voting against this because I think the D Roman numeral 1 target is completely unrealistic. And I think it'll be very, very hard for Aucklanders. And I think the target here is to achieve a reduction in consumption. The full story needs to be told. It needs to be reflected in terms of what are the consequences of that will be higher household water bills, I'm sure. As the consumption levels drop, so too will water revenue. And we also need to reflect the fact that it is ultimately up to Auckland Council if you want to achieve a
lower network leakage target, you've got to pay for it. And we have not paid for it. And I think that it is not reasonable to expect Watercare to be achieving those very, very ambitious targets without stumping up with the working capital to achieve that. And respectfully, issues in respect to saving water so as to avoid the cost of the step change, that is delaying the inevitable, because the reality is that Auckland continues to grow massively and developers are not paying the full cost of that. So I would like to continue the conversation around an ambitious target, but to vote for D Roman numeral 1, which is potable water consumption with immediate effect, expressed as equal or better than, no, that's not for me. I expect that it will probably go through, but I think that we need to address what are the actual consequences for Aucklanders who have already been the ones that have saved our bacon by making significant savings to get us through the summer drought, and I'm sure we'll continue to make those savings. We have baked in those savings and we're asking them to go further, but not explained the unintended consequences of those savings targets. Thank you, Chair. I don't require a division, but if my vote can be recorded.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, I mean, we can always do better, but I think we've come a long way since last year. The work that we've been doing together with staff from Watercare and our staff, I mean, and under constraints, even staffing constraints. I mean, you know, just some of the acknowledgements of Alex Tang earlier, you know, that team's been working under constraints as well. I think that we need to acknowledge the work that's done. It is heading in the right direction, and that's all we can do when we already are under the pump with money. You know, you can't do this with thin air. You've got to have money. Watercare are constrained by our balance sheet. We have all of these issues right across everything we're doing. I think we've just got to keep chipping away. And I know that, you know, 11% actually is quite a tough target, but we've had a commitment from Watercare to keep working towards it. But we have to have it in our mind and our LTP as well. You know, what are we prepared to fund? So we, you know, there's a whole lot of factors here. The other discussions around, you know, different plan changes and regulation changes, you know, I don't think we can do a suite of resolutions here. We have to be working across council and all our departments trying to get all the targets in a whole lot of areas. It'll take a whole lot of cross-council and cross-group work. And I think we're way better at that than we ever were, but we're not perfect yet. So I'm prepared. I'm absolutely prepared to support this because it's about balancing a whole lot of factors here. If you're just going to be tunnel vision on one here, everything we do here is going to affect everything else we do. Nothing is in isolation. So just got to try and do what we can do with the money we've got, with a committed intention to reduce per capita water use, keep working with businesses to reduce. I mean, if you look at the savings we've made over the last, not quite a year, the bulk of that saving has been by our council and businesses, which is really great. You know, and I look at the graph that I get every week where what we thought we would use and what we have used, it's extraordinary. And it's, you know, a real credit to the whole of the region. And we just need to embed those practices into our everyday lives and everyday business processes to get to those levels we want. And I just liken it to zero waste, right? We've got a zero waste target. Just because we say zero doesn't mean we're going to get to zero today. But today we're looking at saying these are the targets and let's keep working towards them.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Cooper, and thank you very much for working with Councillor Coombe and I and the teams on this. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, and really Councillor Cooper has said more or less what I was going to say. We, and thank you to Watercare and to Toby and the team who have done the work on this. I thought we had a pretty good workshop actually, and now we're relitigating it. You know, we talked about the targets and we have made an investment. We've decided on the investment. That's pretty limiting on how ambitious we can be. We have asked and we agreed at that time that those targets would be reviewed as we achieve, how we respond, they would be reviewed. If they are not, if anyone is sceptical about them, about Watercare and or Toby and team coming back with the recommendations, we only have to look at ourselves. We are the governors. We remember to go back and say, you told us that we'd review these. So I think that a lot of work has gone into this. I'll be supporting all of the recommendations, and it's interesting conversations that we've been having this morning, and thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Dalton. Mayor Goff.
Thank you. I wasn't intending to speak on this until I heard the first two speeches. There's an old saying, never abandon the good in order to find the perfect solution. This isn't the perfect solution. Nobody's pretending it is. But for God's sake, the chief criticism of this council is until now we haven't had a water strategy. Now we've got a water strategy. I think the presentation was a good one. I think a lot of work has gone into it. I don't think it's the final word, but I think it's a bloody good platform to build on. And that's what we should be using this strategy for. I can think of a lot of things that we might explore and what we might do in addition to this, but this is a sound starting point, and I welcome the fact that we've finally got to the position where we have a water strategy, and I welcome the fact that for the first time, bit of a condemnation of council and Watercare in the past, that we didn't have the working relationship that enabled something like this to be put together. So what we're celebrating today is that both sides have made a genuine effort to come together to put something in place that I think will take us forward. And, you know, while I'll be critical, as is our role as a governing body at times of what our council might do or what Watercare might do, let's not forget we've got the country's best per capita water consumption. We've got the best quality fresh water supply in the country. We've got the best treatment of wastewater in the country. Does that mean to say we should be complacent and say everything's fine, we don't need to do anything? Of course not. But we can build on those things that we should be quite proud of to say we can and we will do better, and we will go down the path of looking for constant improvement. But to say, look, you know, if we cut demand per capita, that's going to lose money. We're not a private business designed simply to maximise profit. We are a council designed to maximise the well-being of our city, its people and its environment. So of course we're looking to draw down demand. Can we do more to draw down demand? Yes, we can and we should. There's two councillors here that are in that little corner pocket of best practice, because we don't take a litre out of the water supply for the city, and we rely on rainwater tanks, and we'll do more of that in the future, but it's not feasible to do what Bill and I might do in our backyard if you're in an apartment in the city. But there are some good ideas in this. We should embrace them and we should move forward. And when we look at leakage, all I'd say there is that there is that sweet spot between reducing leakage to the maximum point that it is economic to do so. Yeah. If it's not economic to do so, then you'll look at other solutions. That's the law of economics. So I support this and would urge all councillors to cast their vote in favour of it.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. Councillor Darby.
Thank you. And look, I guess the challenge is we were starting a long way back in the field, and I think it must be coming up at least 2 years, if not more, since we embarked on I think it was a water discussion paper or something like that. And we quickly found out that that did not remotely resemble a strategy. It was helping to inform a strategy, but it had nothing about it that was strategic. And Chair, Deputy Chair, I have to acknowledge it's probably unseen to a lot of the members of the work that you've been doing behind the scenes with staff. Toby and Greer and Marlon and his team as well. I know there's been some real contest of ideas in this, and that's good. It's been a hard one, but we have got an enormous way to go. So starting out at the back of the pack even though we're the so-called best in New Zealand, for me that is not a measure. Water care is like no other. It should be looking out and benchmarking absolutely against the best in the world. And this pathway, let's be honest, is way better than where we have ever been before, but let's be honest, it does not deliver climate resilient and low carbon urban water. We will have to do more work to achieve that. So some honesty is required. The pathway positions water care as a good practice provider, not a best practice provider. Honesty required there as well. When you start so far back in the field, you've got to get up there in step by step. And we're not in a position to be able to take that big leap at the moment for the reasons outlined by others. So it does sort of position what I sort of say is, water care as there's the best average in the world. Now, I'm not being unkind because we are the owners of water care. We're responsible. But it does remind me of Flight of the Conchords, who went onto the world stage and talked about themselves as, I think, being the fourth most popular folk comedy duo in New Zealand. And they rose to be the most popular in the world. So there's hope. So I hope that we can start to look out at International Water Association, water-sensitive cities, look beyond England and Scotland and look at some cities, exemplars working in this area that are doing stuff that we've not imagined yet. And so let's hit the stage with them, and then we will, I'm sure, be able to come back and look at this pathway and modify it, refine it, so that we are a water provider that is going to deliver climate resilient, low carbon water for our Aucklanders. Thanks, Chair.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Darby. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. And I'm just sitting here, I've certainly appreciated the contributions from the likes of Councillor Newman, Walker and Darby. It certainly made me think about how we should be approaching this in the short term, but also the medium term. And I guess I'm a little reassured by the phrase up there in D, equal or better than. So as much as these initial targets, what I'm hearing, and I certainly agree with, is that we certainly have the capacity here to be a bit more ambitious, and so we should. Our country, if we look at our history, not so much in recent times, but certainly for much of the first part of the 20th century was a leader in a number of things. So New Zealand just wasn't a follower or an average participant. It was a country that had resilient people who were innovative and made all sorts of contributions that had world-class status. We seem to have lost a little bit of that impetus in recent decades. So as far as this goes, I think there is capacity to get far more ambitious targets. When I look at people I know, yes, certainly they've stepped up to the plate, if we can say that, over the water crisis, but there's a capacity to go a lot further of that. I am absolutely sure in terms of conservation. It's not just rural people living out in the back blocks of Franklin that use their own water. We have people in urban settings too, like Whangaproa Peninsula, who are some of the best water conservationists in the country, I would suggest. They're very careful with their water and have some quite remarkable savings if you talk to people on an individual basis. Similarly, there are other people around who are still as lavish as anything, and the message is clearly, as to be expected in some way, not getting through to those people. So yes, let's maybe start with that, but let's really bear in mind that better than tag. And let's strive for that. One of the features of COVID, of the lockdown, was this apparent opportunity to look at things differently, not just return to the old ways of the past or a scaled version thereof. So I don't think our country's taken that line yet, and I don't want things trumped by the old, it costs this, or it's we'll wait to another decade or 2 decades. If you're listening to our young people and other people beside, they want action now. That's what they're demanding, and they're getting somewhat frustrated that that action isn't forthcoming. So thank you for those councillors who have signalled that, because I think that's important. Those officers get that message. And as far as my parting shot, certainly I agree with Councillor Newman. It'll be an incredibly perverse result in this if we have a situation where people are saving more water and following, the greater good, and their water bills are going up. And we see 7% rises indicated for the first couple of years, 9.5% for the balance of the decade. Average water bill, as I understand, it's around about $1,000 in my neck of the woods. The doubling of that, while people are trying to save, that doesn't quite seem to equate to me. That seems to be rather perverse. So I'll be supporting it in light of that, but I've certainly taken on board the commentaries of some of our more ambitious compatriots, because I agree with them. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Watson. And that's the end of the speaking list, just making sure. Cool, and I'll just finish up with, first of all, just to thank you again to Toby and Greer, the Watercare team, Marlon and team. It's actually been fantastic to have this joined up working on this water strategy, and this is the first significant part of the water strategy. Some of the comments, as I think maybe Mayor Goff pointed out, had been a little bit confusing, but I welcome them because we've taken this journey together. We've sat in workshops, we've gone through this, we've been very clear about what's possible, what's ambitious, where we're going, and where we need to head. So some of it feels that I'm definitely not delaying this because we've gone through this pretty clear over and over, and I think the report and the agenda item speaks for itself. So thank you all for working on that. I do think this is a really good thing. We haven't had joined up targets like this before, and Watercare especially will tell you they are ambitious, and it's not going to be easy to address them. But I do think, answering some of the questions around the table, we have to do this, I believe, to potentially delay future capital that we might need in decades' time, but also because even with the Waikato discussion right now, there's been public statements from Waikato Tainui, from Hamilton, from Waikato Regional Council that they only really want us to be taking from the Waikato River if we've done everything we can to reduce our use over time first, or that we are not wasting or not using our water wisely. So I think this is an important decision and discussion to make sure that we are using water the best that we can. The other thing is this is a significant step forward, and it's not perfect. I would love to be more ambitious. My idea is 0% leakage. That is not, we know that is not possible, simply because I've seen it on my own street, that getting through the summer with the drought and then the clay moving, I think we had more than triple the leaks that we normally do because of the drought, and we had teams out there through the night. I had people working on the berm near my house throughout the night, 3 in the morning, but of course that water is gushing away at the same time. So I know that there's been an increased spend on that. I want it to be more, but as we've discussed in response to Councillor Simpson's question, to get higher than those targets, you're talking about the $500 million, and we aren't providing that. There are lots of things in council that I wish were more ambitious. I'm concerned about the RLTP out there, that it's not as ambitious on carbon emissions as it could be, but we don't hold all the tools there. We don't hold the decision-making over government's projects. We don't necessarily have all the money that we could have to reduce those emissions as yet. But I think there's a difference, and I've learned in this role that there's a difference between being a campaigner and hoping for the best, and marching for the best, and saying that, and being a governor and putting the money where our mouth is, and also being, agreeing on the steps with the experts on our staff and Watercare staff that say what is possible. And I think often we give CCOs unrealistic targets and then point the finger at them as soon as they fail, but we didn't fund you right, or we didn't give you the opportunity to say you could or could not do it. So I do think this is ambitious, but I also know it's doable. And I will go to, I think it's university, the goal-setting regime of SMART. You've probably all heard it before, but the SMART model of goal decision making is smart, is it specific? We put targets in that are specific. Is it measurable? We're making it measurable. Is it achievable? We hope it is and we believe it is. And is it relevant and reasonable, realistic? And is it time bound? We have put these decisions in to be time bound, but that is also why I added D3 in there, because I'm hoping that we want you to measure these targets, but I'm hoping with D3 that we actually beat them and that we work the next couple of years to continue that conversation, to maybe find different technologies, to find different where we might be able to be more ambitious. But I'm really not wanting to put anyone in a way that is not possible. I think also to hear both sides of it, that it's too ambitious and it's not ambitious enough, maybe says that we maybe are hitting a sweet spot at this moment, but I believe we can be much better. But I also don't want to be unrealistic as a politician and be a campaigner for something that's not possible. So thank you all. I think this is a really, really good discussion, and I know we're all passionate about water. We're passionate about the fact that Aucklanders are passionate about water. We're saving over $100 million a day, 100 million litres a day on average compared to we were last year. So we know we can do it, but we just want to lock in those savings, and some of that is here on paper. So thank you all. This is a long road or river ahead. So thank you very much. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those opposed? Cool, so no on D1. And would you like your vote recorded against, Councillor Walker? Perfect. Thank you very much. And that is all on that item. Great. I felt like I was going to put a mallet down or something. Cool, thank you. Yeah, so we move item 10, the summary of information. Councillor Darby has moved. A seconder. Councillor Stewart. All those in favour?
Aye.
Darby Stewart.
Mr. Chair, could you just acknowledge that I do not support the climate change submission in the form it's gone in, but that's just by the by.
Cool. Yes.
Because of its lack of balance in the ad content.
We'll notice. We will note your opposition in the minutes. Thank you. And 11, consideration of extraordinary business. None. And now we will close the meeting. There is no, because we hoped it would be a little bit shorter, but there is no lunch today for us. Yeah, there is some snacks on the table there, but I believe we'd be finished early, and we didn't. Thank you.